600 miles from the mountain where Evelyn Carter would soon be buried alive, a man in a pressed civilian suit slid a folder across a polished table and said the words that would kill an entire SEAL team. "The coordinates are confirmed. Send them in tonight." He smiled as he said it. He knew the intelligence was a lie. He knew the target building held not a handful of insurgents, but dozens of armed fighters waiting in the dark. And he did not care. If you are watching this, please subscribe to the channel, stay with me all the way to the end, and comment the name of the city you are watching from so I can see just how far this story travels. The rain came sideways across the ridgeline like it had a grudge against the living. Chief Warrant Officer Evelyn Carter lay flat against the cold stone, her rifle stock pressed into the hollow of her shoulder, and she did not move. She had not moved in 40 minutes. She had trained her body for exactly this, for the long stillness that most men could not hold. And at 41 years old, she still held it better than anyone in the unit. The storm hammered her back. The water found every seam in her gear and ran down her spine in freezing lines. She let it. Cold was just information. Cold did not change the mission. Below her in the black bowl of the valley sat the compound they had come 9,000 miles to hit. "Overwatch, this is Mitchell. You got eyes." The voice in her earpiece was low and steady. Master Chief Ryan Mitchell had a way of talking on the radio that sounded almost bored, and Evelyn had learned years ago that the calmer Ryan sounded, the more dangerous the moment actually was. "I've got the whole yard," she answered. "2 sentries on the north wall. One on the roof west corner, sitting down like he thinks the weather's going to keep him company. Nobody's expecting us tonight." "Copy that. Feels quiet." It always feels quiet right before it doesn't. There was a short pause on the line, and then Ryan said the thing he always said before they went in. "You watch our backs up there, Evie." "I've watched your back for 11 years, Master Chief. I'm not about to stop tonight." She did not smile when she said it, but something in her chest warmed a half degree, and in that kind of cold, a half degree mattered. Evelyn Carter had come a long way to lie on a wet mountain in a country that most of the men she grew up with could not have found on a map. She was born in a small ranch town in Montana where the winters bit down hard and the summers were short and golden. Her father had taught her to shoot before she could drive, standing behind her in a wheat field with his big rough hands over her small ones, telling her to breathe out slow and let the shot surprise her. "Don't chase it, Evie," he used to say. "You never chase the shot. You wait for it to come to you." He had been dead 11 years now. She still heard his voice every single time she settled her cheek against the stock. 2 decades she had given to this. 2 decades of foreign dirt and borrowed beds and funerals for men she loved like brothers. She had been the first woman to do a dozen things that the record books would never officially admit she had done, because the missions did not exist, because the places she had gone had no names that anyone would say out loud. She did not do it for the credit. She had stopped needing credit a long time ago. She did it because somewhere along the way, she had decided that the men on the other end of her radio were going to come home to their children, and that decision had become the whole of who she was. "Overwatch Command wants a go time," Ryan said. She checked the sentries again. She checked the wind, the rain, the angle of the roofline. Everything sat exactly where it should. That was the problem, though she did not know it yet. Everything sat too perfectly, like a stage that had been set for them. "Send them," she said. "I'm on the wall." The team moved. Evelyn watched her men slide out of the darkness and flow toward the compound like water finding a crack. She had watched this 100 times, and it still took her breath a little, the way 12 grown men could vanish into the night and become nothing at all. Her crosshair floated over the North Sentry. The man had no idea he had less than a minute left to decide his own future. She did not want to take him. She never wanted to take any of them. But she would the instant her men were exposed, because that was the arrangement she had made with herself long ago in a field of Montana wheat with her father's hands over hers. "Breaching the outer gate," Ryan whispered. "Stand by." "Standing by. North Sentry's mine if he turns." "He won't turn. Nobody's home upstairs tonight, Evie. This one's going to be easy." "Don't say that." "Say what?" "Easy. You know better." Ryan let out a small breath that might have been a laugh. "You're getting superstitious in your old age." "I'm getting old because I'm superstitious. There's a difference." Then the gate opened and the world ended. It did not happen as way it happens in movies, with a single dramatic gunshot and a slow build. It happened all at once from every direction, as if the entire mountain had been holding its breath and finally exhaled fire. The compound that had shown Evelyn 3 sleepy centuries suddenly bloomed with muzzle flashes from every window, every rooftop, every dark doorway. Not a dozen fighters, not 2 dozen. She counted the flashes the way she counted everything fast and cold, and the number her mind returned made her stomach drop. Contact, contact, contact. Ryan's voice was no longer calm. We are taking fire from all sides. They were waiting for us. They were waiting for us. Ryan, get off the wall. Evelyn was already firing. Her rifle bucked against her shoulder, and the North Sentry folded. She shifted, fired again, took a shape out of a second-story window that had a machine gun coming up. Pull back to the ditch line. The north wall's a kill box. Do you hear me? Pull back. We can't move. They've got the whole yard zeroed. Peterson's hit. Peterson's down. The names started coming, man, the way they always did in the worst minutes. Peterson down, Reyes pinned, Vasquez dragging someone whose voice she could not hear. Evelyn's hands did not shake. Her hands never shook. She emptied one magazine and slapped in another and made herself into a machine that solved problems one flash at a time, because if she let herself feel what she was feeling, if she let herself understand that her men were dying in that yard, she would be no good to any of them. Overwatch, we are getting overrun, Ryan said, and now she could hear the thing under his voice that she had almost never heard in 11 years. She heard fear. I need a way out. Give me a way out, Evie. She found it. Of course she found it. That was what she was for. There was a dry gully that ran along the eastern edge of the compound, choked with rock and brush, invisible from the buildings if a man stayed low. It led up the shoulder of the mountain and away. It was the only door left in a house that was burning down. Eastern Gully, she said, 40 meters off your 2 o'clock. It's dead ground from the buildings, they can't see it, but you've got open yard to cross to reach it. About 20 meters of nothing. 20 meters of open yard with 100 guns on us. You'll have cover. I'll give you cover. Evie, from up there, you can't hold all of them. There's too many. They'll walk fire right up the slope to your position the second they figure out where you are. Then they'd better not figure it out fast. She was already moving, sliding to a new firing position, one that gave her a clean line onto the open yard the team would have to cross. Ryan, listen to me. On my mark, you move everybody to the gully. All of them. Every single one. You do not stop. You do not turn around. You do not come back for anybody who falls. You carry the ones you can and you run. What about you? She did not answer that. Evie, what about you? You come off that mountain with us. Get your men to the gully, Master Chief. Do not do this. 3, she said. Evelyn. 2. Evelyn, that is a direct order. You are coming with us. Do you copy? 1, move. And she opened up. What happened next, the men who lived through it would tell for the rest of their lives, and they would never quite have the words for it. From a single position on a wet black mountain, one sniper began to take the enemy apart with a speed and a precision that did not seem possible. Every fighter who raised a weapon toward the crossing team dropped before he could aim it. Every muzzle flash that swung toward the open yard went dark. She was not firing at men. She was firing at intentions, reading the enemy a half second before they moved, closing doors before they opened. The team ran. 12 became a broken line of stumbling, bleeding, dragging men, and they crossed the 20 meters of open ground, and they lived because she made a wall of fire out of nothing but a rifle and a will that would not bend. We're in the gully, Ryan gasped. We're in, we made it. We're in. Now you come to us, Evie, you break contact, and you come to us right now. I can't. Yes, you can. You disengage, and you fall back east. We'll cover you. Just move. Ryan, if I stop shooting, they stop being pinned. The second I move, they'll come up out of that compound, and they'll be on your gully in 90 seconds. You've got wounded that can't run. You need time. I'm the time. The radio went quiet, and in that quiet, Ryan Mitchell understood exactly what she was telling him, and Evelyn heard the moment his heart broke because she had known him for 11 years, and she knew every sound he made. No, he said. No, we don't leave people. That's the whole thing, Evie. That's the one thing, we don't leave people. You taught me that. You taught all of us that. I'm not asking you to leave me. I'm asking you to save 11 men. That's a different thing, and you know it's a different thing. Evie, get them home, Ryan. Get them home for me. She heard him say her name one more time. She reached up and she keyed her radio off because she could not do what she needed to do while listening to a man she loved beg her to live. She would carry the silence that came after for however long she had left, and she found that she did not mind carrying it. It was a good weight. It was the right weight. Then Chief Warrant Officer Evelyn Carter turned her full attention to the compound below her, and she went to work. She would think in the strange, clear hours that came later that those first minutes alone on the mountain were the most alive she had ever felt. Everything narrowed, everything simplified. There was no mission anymore, no politics, no chain of command, no future. There was only the storm and the mountain and the enemy climbing toward her and the single simple job of buying 11 men enough time to disappear into the dark. She moved between 3 firing positions she had picked out an hour before, out of the habit of a lifetime, and she made the enemy believe there were more of her than there were. She fired from the left, then scrambled low to the right and fired again. And to the men climbing the slope in the rain, it seemed the whole ridge was defended. They came anyway. There were too many of them not to come. "American, American," she heard one of them shouting up the slope in broken English, his voice half swallowed by thunder. "You are alone, American. We know you are alone. Your friends have run away. They have left you to die on this mountain." She did not answer. She let him climb closer to the sound of his own voice, and she took him out of the fight, and she moved again. She was hit for the first time somewhere in that stretch, though she could not have said exactly when. A round clipped her left side and spun her half around, and she felt the hot wire of it go through her without giving it permission, and she kept firing. Pain was information. Pain did not change the mission. She had 11 men in a gully and 100 fighters coming up a mountain, and the math of that was very simple, and she intended to keep it simple for as long as her body would let her. Down in the operations center, a world away, Colonel Nathan Brooks stood in front of a wall of screens and watched a nightmare unfold that he could not stop. Nathan Brooks was 53 years old, and he had sent a great many young men and women into a great many dark places, and he had learned at a cost he never talked about, that the hardest part of command was not the danger. The hardest part was the helplessness. He stood in a room full of technology worth more than the town Evelyn Carter grew up in, and he could see her mountain from a drone 20,000 feet in the air, and he could do nothing at all except watch and pray, and Colonel Brooks was not a praying man. "Get me QRF," he said. "I want a quick reaction force spun up right now. I want birds in the air. I don't care what it costs." "Sir, the storm," a young officer said. "Ceilings on the deck. Nothing can fly into that valley, sir. Not tonight. Nothing survives that downdraft." "Then find me something that can." "There isn't anything, Colonel." Nathan Brooks looked at the screen at the tiny thermal shape of the sniper he had known for years, the woman who had walked into his office more than once and told him he was wrong to his face and been right every time, and he felt the floor of his stomach fall away. "Carter," he said, though she could not hear him, though her radio was dark. "Carter, get off that mountain. That's an order. Get off that mountain and come home." On the mountain, Evelyn was talking to her father. She did not decide to do it. It just started happening somewhere past the point where the blood loss began to make the edges of the world go soft. She would take a shot and hear his voice. "Breathe out slow, Evie. Don't chase it." She would move to a new position with her side screaming and hear him again. "You never chase the shot. You wait for it to come to you." She had not heard his voice this clearly in 11 years, and some distant, frightened part of her mind understood exactly what that meant, and she chose not to listen to that part. "I'm not chasing it, Dad," she whispered into the rain. "I'm doing it just like you taught me." An enemy commander's voice cut across the storm closer, now angrier. He was shouting orders in a language she half understood, and she caught the important words. Mortars. He was calling for mortars. He had lost too many men to a single ghost on the ridge, and he had decided to stop climbing and simply erase the entire mountainside instead. That was fine. That was actually fine, and she almost laughed when she understood it. Because mortars took time to set up, and every second they spent aiming tubes at her was another second the men in the gully were getting farther away, another few meters between her brothers and the graves that had been dug for all of them tonight. "Take your time," she murmured toward the enemy she could not see. "Set it up nice and careful. No rush at all." The first mortar round landed 40 meters below her and to the left, and the mountain jumped. The second landed closer. Evelyn keyed her radio back on. She had promised herself she would not, but she had 11 men to think about, and one last thing she needed to say, and she was running out of the kind of time a person can measure. Any station, this is Overwatch. Her voice was steadier than it had any right to be. Be advised, enemy is now walking mortar fire onto my position. I have kept them off the eastern gully as long as I am able. If the ground team is clear, they are clear. Tell them I said they did good. Tell them I said they did real good. The reply came instantly, and it was not Ryan. It was Colonel Brooks himself, and his voice was cracked wide open in a way that no one in that operations center had ever heard from him. Carter, this is Brooks. I have you on thermal. I see you. Do you hear me? I see you, and I am not letting go. You find cover, and you hold on. We are coming for you. I swear to God, we are coming. Colonel, a mortar round landed close enough to throw rock and mud across her back, and she pressed her face to the stone and waited for the world to steady. Colonel, with respect, you are not coming tonight. There's no bird alive that flies in this. We both know it. Don't you get anybody else killed trying to reach a position that's already lost. You hear me? That's the last thing I've got to say to you, and I need you to hear it. That is not your call. It's the only call I've got left, sir. Her voice softened, and for one moment she let herself be a person and not a machine. Nathan, it's all right. This is all right. I got them out. 11 of them. That's a good trade. That's the best trade I ever made in my whole life. Don't you dare turn it into a bad one. There was a sound on the radio that a lifetime of discipline could not fully hide. And Evelyn Carter, who had watched this man command through the worst nights either of them had ever known, understood that Colonel Nathan Brooks was crying. You come home, he said. Whatever it takes, you come home to us. That's an order, Chief. That is a direct order. I always try to follow your orders, sir, she almost smiled, even the ones I don't like. Then the enemy found their range. The mortars stopped walking and started falling directly onto the ridge, where she lay one after another, and the whole shoulder of the mountain began to come apart. She heard it before she felt it, a deep grinding groan far below the sound of the explosions, the sound of thousands of tons of rock that had held its place for 10,000 years finally deciding to move. The ground under her body shifted, a crack opened somewhere she could not see, and the crack became a fissure, and the fissure became the whole side of the mountain sliding down into the dark. In the operations center, the men and women around Colonel Brooks watched the thermal feed, and they saw the mountain move. Sir, the young officer said and could not finish. The entire ridgeline where Evelyn Carter had made her stand simply collapsed. On the screen, it looked almost gentle, a slow gray sheet of stone and mud folding down into the valley, swallowing the position, swallowing the fire, swallowing everything. The drone camera caught it all in perfect thermal detail, and then there was nothing to catch anymore. No muzzle flashes, no heat signature, no shape of a woman lying against the stone, just the cooling scar of a landslide and the rain in the dark. Carter, come in. Brooks's voice was barely a whisper. Carter, Overwatch, come in. Come in, Evie, please. Come in. The radio gave him nothing but the hiss of the storm. He tried for 4 minutes. The entire operations center stood in silence and listened to their colonel call a name into the dark over and over, and no one had the heart to tell him to stop, and no one had the heart to keep listening either. On the thermal feed, the collapsed ground slowly bled its heat into the freezing rain and went cold, and a person who knew what they were looking at understood exactly what that cold meant. Sir, the young officer finally said very gently. Sir, the whole ridge came down. That's thousands of tons on top of that position, Colonel. There's no. Nathan Brooks lowered the radio handset very slowly like it had become the heaviest thing in the world. Say it, he said. Sir, you're about to make me say it, so say it yourself. That's your job now. Say it. The young officer's voice shook. We have to call it Colonel. Brooks closed his eyes. He thought about the first time he had met Evelyn Carter, a lean, quiet woman with a Montana accent, who had corrected his target analysis in front of a room full of men who outranked her and been right and never once said, I told you so. He thought about the 11 men she had just pulled out of a burning yard with nothing but a rifle and her own refusal to leave a single one of them behind. He thought about the fact that he had signed the order that sent her onto that mountain, that the intelligence had been wrong, that somewhere in the chain of information that led to tonight, something had been broken, and 11 men lived, and one woman was buried under half a mountain because of it. He would spend a long time thinking about that last part, longer than anyone knew. "Log it," he said, and his voice was empty. "Chief Warrant Officer Evelyn Carter." He had to stop. He made himself go on. "Killed in action. Body." His jaw worked. Body unrecovered. Someone in the room began to cry quietly. Brooks did not turn to see who. He kept his eyes on the dead gray feet on the cold scar where the mountain had closed over the best soldier he had ever known, and he made himself a promise that he would keep in ways he could not yet imagine. 12 kilometers to the east in the bottom of a rocky draw, Master Chief Ryan Mitchell heard the words come through his earpiece, and his knees went out from under him. He had gotten his men clear. All 11 of them, the wounded carried, the dying stabilized, every last man dragged through the storm and up out of the valley to a ridgeline where the birds could finally reach them. He had done exactly what she told him to do. He had not stopped. He had not turned around. He had run with his heart tearing itself in half because a woman he loved, like his own sister, had ordered him to save the men in his care, and saving people was the one thing she had spent 11 years teaching him to value above his own life. And now the radio told him she was gone, and the whole terrible mathematics of the night landed on him at once. 11 men breathing because one woman had stayed behind. He looked at the men around him in the dark, at Peterson with a tourniquet on his leg, at Reyes clutching a wound in his shoulder, at all of them alive, all of them going home to wives and mothers and children, and he understood that every single breath any of them would ever take from this night forward was a gift that Evelyn Carter had bought with her own life, and he put his face in his bloody hands and he wept like he had not wept since he was a boy. "Master Chief," someone was shaking him. "Vasquez." "Master Chief, the birds are inbound. They're 2 minutes out. We gotta move to the LZ. We gotta move." "She's gone," Ryan said. "Vasquez, she's gone. The mountain came down on her. She's gone, and it's because she stayed for us." "I know." Vasquez's own voice was breaking. "I know, Master Chief, and the best thing we can do for her right now is make sure every one of us gets on that bird alive, because that's what she died for. So get up. Get up. She did not do all that just so we'd sit here and quit." That reached him. Of course that reached him. Because Vasquez was right, and Vasquez was saying the exact thing Evelyn would have said in almost the exact words she would have used. And Ryan Mitchell got up off the ground with his heart in pieces, and he did his job. Because doing the job when your heart is in pieces was the whole thing she had taught them the entire lesson. The only lesson that ever really mattered. The helicopters came out of the storm like something impossible. 2 big shapes fighting the wind, and the broken team loaded their wounded and climbed aboard and lifted off into the black. Ryan sat in the shaking dark of the aircraft with his men all around him, alive, every one of them alive. And he stared out the open door at the mountains disappearing behind them, and he made a promise to a woman he believed was dead. He did not say it out loud. He said it in the place where he kept the things that mattered most. "I will spend the rest of my life being worth it," he told her. "I swear to you, Evie, I will spend every day I have left being worth what you did tonight." He did not know, could not have known that far behind them, under a scar of freshly fallen stone and a pocket of dark that the mountain had left almost by accident, a heart was still beating. It was beating slowly. It was fighting for every single stroke. Around it lay broken ribs and a shattered arm, and more lost blood than a body is supposed to survive. And above it lay a weight of rock that no rescue would ever dig through in time. And by every law of medicine and physics and simple common sense, that heart should already have stopped. But Evelyn Carter's father had told her something once, standing behind her in a field of Montana wheat, with his big rough hands over her small ones. He had told her that the shot always comes to the one who is patient enough to wait for it. And buried under half a mountain in a country 9,000 miles from home, declared dead by the men who loved her, mourned already by a colonel and a master chief and 11 living brothers, Chief Warrant Officer Evelyn Carter did the only thing she had ever really known how to do. She waited. She waited, and she breathed one slow breath at a time, slow, just like he taught her, never chasing it, letting each breath surprise her by arriving at all. And somewhere in the deepest part of her fading mind, below the pain and the cold and the crushing dark, one single thought held on with everything it had. The thought that had been the whole of who she was for 2 decades, the thought that would not die, even when the rest of her was ready to. They got out. All 11, they got out. The storm howled over the grave of a woman who was not in it yet. The enemy began to climb the fresh scar of the landslide, not to save anyone, but to find a body to photograph proof that America's deadliest woman had finally been put in the ground, to carry that proof down the mountain and hold it up to the world. They believed she was dead. Down in the cold and the dark, buried beneath the mountain that was supposed to be her tomb, Evelyn Carter's eyes opened. Part 2 lưu ý Việt đủ 6.000 đến 6.500 từ. Liên kết liền mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện pha hội thoại tạo thành một câu chuyện liền mạch khi ghép lại. Mỗi phần liền mạch với phần trước không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện ở đầu phần mới. Liên kết các phần của câu chuyện một cách liền mạch. Sử dụng câu chuyện tiếp giữa các phần. Duy trì chủ đề, tránh ngắt quãng đột ngột, không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng hoặc tiêu đề phụ phong cách. Kể chuyện Mỹ Hoa Kỳ giống văn giàu cảm xúc chân thực và gần gũi, không mô tả cảnh, tập trung vào hành động, cảm xúc và tâm lý nhân vật. Viết phần tiếp đạt điểm 10 trên 10 và bổ sung tiết tấu câu chuyện nhanh, sửa lỗi AI, kể theo ngôi thứ 3 tăng độ, kịch tính không viết lán mắn, kết thúc phần không giới thiệu phần sau. Lưu ý trả lời trong mục tin nhắn không nhảy sang mức document mới. 2 đến 3 phút cần có mini climax và đặt 10 đến 15 mini climax mỗi. Phần cử 10 đến 12 phút có một twist lớn sâu sắc đan xen mini cliffhanger mạnh hơn. Tăng tính tự nhiên cho phản ứng của các nhân vật, thêm nhịp điệu, kịch tính thực tế và gần gũi. Mỗi 8 đến 10 phút cần có móc giữ chân khán giả, thêm đánh dấu thời gian. Lưu ý không mô tả cảnh, không có phần gạch trong bài viết, viết văn bản phù hợp với TTS và chỉ cần viết nội dung và viết đúng lệnh nha. Show more part 2. The first thing she understood was that she was still alive. And the second thing she understood was that this was a problem she would have to solve, because being alive under half a mountain was not the same as staying that way. Evelyn Carter opened her eyes to absolute black. Not the darkness of a moonless night, which the human eye eventually learns to read, but a total pressing tomb dark that had weight to it. For a long moment, she did not move, and she did not panic, because panic burned oxygen, and oxygen was suddenly a currency she had very little of. She lay in the ruin of the mountain, and she took a careful inventory of herself, the way her father had taught her to check a rifle in the dark, one piece at a time. No rushing, no skipping. Left side wet and hot, where the round had gone through. Ribs, at least 3 of them, broken each breath, a knife she had to make peace with. Left arm wrong, badly wrong. Bent at an angle arms are not supposed to make. Right arm pinned but working. Legs present. Both of them. She flexed her toes inside her boots and felt them answer, and something in her chest loosened by that half a degree that meant everything in a place like this. "Okay," she whispered, and her own voice was strange to her, thick and cracked. "Okay, Dad, one piece at a time." She could not have said how long she had been unconscious. Hours, she guessed, from the stiffness and the cold that had sunk all the way into the center of her. Long enough that the men she loved had already mourned her. Long enough that somewhere a colonel had signed a piece of paper with her name on it and a terrible word beside it. She did not know that yet, not the details, but she knew the shape of it, because she had been a soldier long enough to know exactly what a collapsing ridgeline looked like on a thermal feed, and she knew that anyone watching had watched her die. That thought did something unexpected to her. It steadied her, because if they thought she was dead, then no one was coming, and if no one was coming, then there was no rescue to wait for, and if there was no rescue to wait for, then the only person on earth responsible for keeping Evelyn Carter alive was Evelyn Carter. And that was a situation she understood. She had spent her whole life being the person other people counted on. She could be that person for herself. She would have to be. She started with her right arm. The rock that pinned it was not large, she discovered, working her fingers along its edge in the dark, reading its shape the way a blind woman reads a face. It had wedged against a larger slab, and there was a pocket of space beneath it, and if she could shift her shoulder and drag her arm back at just the right angle, she thought it might come free. It took her a long time. Every attempt sent fire through her broken ribs, and twice she had to stop and breathe through waves of pain so total that the black behind her eyes went white. But she did not chase it. She waited for the pain to crest and fall, the way she waited for a shot, and when the moment came, she pulled, and her right arm came free, and she lay there gasping and shaking and absurdly grinning in the dark. "One piece at a time," she said again. "That's how you eat a mountain, one piece at a time." Then came the digging, and the digging was worse than anything. She could not see, so she worked by feel, reaching up into the debris above her and testing each stone before she moved it. She had one functioning arm and a body that screamed at every motion, and a broken arm she had bound against her chest, with a strip torn from her own gear, using her teeth and her one good hand in a process that took nearly an hour and left her weeping silently from the pain. And still she dug. She moved a stone, then rested, moved another, then rested. She built a rhythm out of it, a slow, patient rhythm, and into the rhythm, she poured the only thing she had left, which was the refusal to lie down and die in a hole 9,000 miles from Montana. You do not, she told herself, moving a rock, get to quit. Another rock. You did not stay on that mountain. Another. So 11 men could go home. Another. Just to lie here. Another. And give up. Another. In the dark. Somewhere in the second hour of digging, she felt air. It was faint, a thread of cold-moving air against the back of her sweat-soaked hand, and she froze and held her own breath so she could be certain. And there it was again, a whisper of the outside world reaching down through the broken stone. She nearly sobbed. She turned her whole broken body toward that thread of air, and she dug for it with a desperation she did not let become panic, because panic still cost oxygen, even now, even this close. And the thread became a trickle, became a current, became finally impossibly a hand pushing up out of the earth into open air, into cold rain, into the living storm. Evelyn Carter pulled herself out of her own grave one agonizing inch at a time, and when her face finally broke the surface of the debris, she turned it up to the rain, and she let the water run into her open mouth, and she thought it was the finest thing she had ever tasted in 41 years of living. She did not celebrate long. She had learned a long time ago that the moment you survive, one thing is exactly the moment the next thing comes for you. And the mountain had not finished with her. She heard them before she saw them. Voices up the slope moving down. Men calling to each other in a language she half understood, their tone easy, unhurried, almost cheerful. She went still against the broken ground, one more shape among 1,000 shapes of rubble, and she listened, and what she heard turned the cold in her body into something harder than cold. They were not a rescue party. They were not looking for survivors. They were coming down the fresh scar of the landslide with lights and shovels, and they were laughing, and from the fragments of their words that she could pull out of the storm, she understood exactly what they wanted. They wanted her body. They knew a sniper had held the ridge alone, and they knew the ridge had come down on top of her, and they were coming to dig out the corpse of the American ghost so they could photograph it, so they could parade it, so they could hold up proof to the whole world that America's deadliest woman was finally and truly dead. Lying in the mud of her own grave, cold and broken, and nearly bled white, Evelyn Carter listened to men laugh about digging up her body, and something inside her that had been very close to giving up got up off the floor and squared its shoulders. You want a body? She breathed into the rain. Come on down here and get one. She did not have her item. It was somewhere under 1,000 tons of rock gone forever. She had a sidearm which had somehow survived, and she had 11 rounds in it, and she had a knife, and she had the storm, and she had the one thing these men did not have, which was that they believed she was already dead. A dead woman is not a threat. A dead woman is a task, a body to be recovered, a photograph to be taken. They were walking down that slope with their guard entirely down, chatting, laughing, treating this mountain like a place where the fighting was already over. She let them come. She counted them as they descended, reading their voices, reading the bounce of their lights against the low storm clouds. 6 she made it. 6 men spread out across the scar in a loose line, sweeping their lights over the rubble, looking for the shape of a woman in the stone. Thunder rolled across the peaks, deep and continuous, the storm at the height of its fury, and Evelyn heard the thunder and understood that the storm was not her enemy. The storm was the greatest gift she had ever been given. Because thunder is loud. Thunder covers a great many sounds. Thunder covers, for instance, the flat crack of a pistol shot if a person is patient enough to wait for the thunder before she fires. The nearest man was 15 feet away when the sky split open with a peal of thunder that shook the whole mountain, and under the cover of that thunder, Evelyn Carter rose up out of the rubble, like the dead she was pretending to be, and she put a single round through him, and he folded silently into the stone, and the thunder rolled on, and none of the other 5 heard a thing. She was back down in the rubble before the sound of the sky finished fading. The others called out to their fallen friend, casually at first, annoyed the way you call to a man who has wandered off. When he did not answer, one of them walked over to look, and Evelyn waited coiled in the dark, counting her heartbeats, watching the storm clouds for the flicker that meant the next thunderclap was coming. It came. She fired. The second man dropped across the body of the first, and the thunder ate the sound whole, and now there were four. And now finally the four remaining men began to understand that something was wrong. She heard it happen. She heard the change in their voices, the easy chatter curdling into sharp, confused questions, then into the first thin edge of fear. They swept their lights faster now, jerkier, jumping from rubble pile to rubble pile, and their voices climbed, and one of them shouted a word that Evelyn knew well because she had heard it shouted at her across a dozen battlefields in a dozen years. It was the word for ghost. "Not yet," she whispered, almost tender, watching them start to unravel. "You're not scared yet, but you will be." She moved. This was the part Yi was best at, the part that had made her a legend in circles, that would never speak her name aloud. She did not stay in one place and trade shots. She flowed through the broken ground like water, using a lifetime of training to become nothing, a shadow among shadows, appearing where they did not expect her and vanishing before they could fix on her. She fired from the left, and a man fell, and by the time the others swung their guns left, she was already gone, already low, and moving right, already waiting for the next roll of thunder. To the three men left alive on that scar of ruined mountain, it seemed the dead woman was everywhere and nowhere, a vengeful spirit killing them one by one out of a storm that hid her completely. They broke. Of course they broke. There is only so much a human mind can take, and being hunted through a thunderstorm by a corpse you came to photograph is well past that limit for any man alive. Two of them ran scrambling back up the slope, abandoning their lights, abandoning their fallen friends, abandoning everything but the animal need to get away from the thing in the storm. The third stood frozen, his light shaking so badly the beam jittered across the rocks, and he called out into the dark in broken, pleading English. "Who are you? What are you? You are dead. We saw you die. The mountain killed you. You are dead." Evelyn Carter did not answer him. She had learned over 2 decades that the most terrifying thing in the world is a silence that should have been an answer. She let the silence stretch. She let his own fear fill it with monsters worse than anything she could have said. And then when the thunder came, she took him too, and the scar of the mountain fell quiet except for the 2 men fleeing up the slope and the endless drumming of the rain. She did not chase them. She let them go, and she let them talk, because 2 terrified men running down a mountain telling everyone they meet that the American ghost is alive, and hunting was worth more to her than 2 dead men lying silent in the stone. Fear was a weapon. Fear traveled. Fear got into the enemy's radios and their command posts and their dreams, and Evelyn Carter, who could no longer fight the way she used to fight, was going to make fear do the fighting for her. She crawled to the nearest body and she went to work, and this was survival at its most basic and unlovely. She took the dead man's coat, thicker and drier than her own soaked gear, and she pulled it on over her broken arm with a stifled scream of pain, and the warmth of it, the simple warmth, brought tears to her eyes. She took his rifle and his ammunition. She took a canteen half full of water and drank it in slow, disciplined sips. And on the second body, she found the thing that changed everything, the thing that turned a woman surviving into a woman fighting a war. She found a radio. It was a cheap thing, a commercial handheld the fighters used to talk among themselves, but it was tuned to their net. And when Evelyn held it to her ear, she could hear them, all of them, the whole panicked chorus of the enemy, scattered across the mountain in the storm. And Evelyn Carter, who had spent years in this country, who had lain silent for 1,000 hours listening to these men talk, when they did not know an American was listening, understood almost every word. They were terrified. The 2 who had run had already spread the word, and the word was spreading faster than the 2 of them could run. The American sniper was not dead. The American sniper had risen from the grave the mountain made for her. The American sniper was in the storm, killing them one by one. And she could not be seen and could not be heard and could not be stopped. Evelyn listened to grown men, hardened fighters who had killed and been prepared to die, talking to each other in voices thin with a fear that had crossed all the way over into the supernatural. And she felt the cold calculation of it settle into her bones. They believed a ghost was hunting them, so she would be a ghost. This is where it turns, she said quietly to the storm, to her father, to the 11 men flying home who could not hear her, to no one at all. They think the story's over. They think they won. They have no idea. The story hasn't even started yet. Far to the rear in the operations center, where the screens had gone dark and the mood had gone darker, Colonel Nathan Brooks sat alone in a chair he had not left in hours, and he was a different man than he had been the day before. He had done all the things a commander does when he loses someone. He had made the calls. He had begun the paperwork. He had spoken to the men who came back the 11 Evelyn had saved, and he had watched Master Chief Ryan Mitchell stand in front of him at rigid attention, with tears running openly down his face, unable to speak. And Brooks had done the only thing he could, which was to put a hand on the younger man's shoulder and say nothing, because there was nothing to say. He had carried a lot of grief in his life. He knew that this particular grief was going to stay with him a long time, because tangled up in it was a knot of something worse than grief, something he had not yet let himself fully look at. The intelligence had been wrong. Brooks was not a man who accepted easy answers, and every hour that passed since the mountain came down, that fact sat heavier on him. 3 sleepy centuries, the reports had said. A soft target, a quick, clean capture. And instead, his people had walked into a fortified position packed with fighters who were waiting for them, who knew they were coming, who had prepared a kill box with the patience of men who had been given time to prepare it. That was not bad luck. That was not the fog of war. Somewhere in his gut, in the place that had kept him alive and kept his people alive for 30 years, Colonel Nathan Brooks knew the difference between a mission that went wrong and a mission that had been set up to go wrong, and this one had the smell of the second thing all over it. "Sir?" The young officer from the night before, a lieutenant named Hayes, stood in the doorway looking like he had not slept, because he had not. "Sir, you should see this." "See what?" "The drone stayed on station, sir, after the collapse. We kept a bird over the valley all night on the chance of, I don't know, recovery remains something. And sir," Hayes swallowed, "in the last 2 hours we picked up something. Small arms fire, on the scar, where the ridge came down." Brooks was on his feet before he decided to stand. "Show me." They pulled up the feed and Brooks watched, and what he saw made no sense and every sense at the same time. There on the freshly collapsed face of the mountain, in the middle of the worst storm the region had seen in a year, were the unmistakable flickers of a firefight. Muzzle flashes, movement, men falling. And it was not a battle between 2 groups, because Brooks knew the signature of that, knew what it looked like when 2 forces traded fire. This was different. This was one point of light moving through the dark, appearing and vanishing, and around it men dying. "That's one shooter," Brooks said slowly. "That's one shooter working a whole squad." "That's what I thought, sir, but that can't be. There's nobody out there. Everybody's back. We accounted for everybody. The only person unaccounted for is—" Hayes stopped. The room went very quiet. Brooks did not take his eyes off the screen. He watched that single point of light kill and move and kill and move, watched it do the exact thing he had watched Evelyn Carter do 100 times in 100 briefings, that unmistakable style, that impossible economy of motion. One shooter making the enemy believe they were surrounded, and Colonel Nathan Brooks felt something crack open in his chest that he had spent all night trying to seal shut. "Get me Mitchell," he said, and his voice was not steady. "Get me Master Chief Mitchell right now." "Sir, it can't be her. The ridge came down on top of her. We all saw it. Nobody survives that." "I know what we saw." Brooks turned to face the lieutenant, and there was something burning in his eyes now that had not been there an hour ago, something that was half hope and half fury and entirely dangerous. "I know exactly what we saw, Lieutenant. We saw the best soldier I have ever served with get buried under half a mountain. And now I am looking at a feed that shows one shooter in the middle of a storm in the exact place we buried her, killing an enemy squad in a style I would recognize anywhere on this earth." He jabbed a finger at the screen. "So you tell me, son, you tell me what I'm looking at, because I am looking at a ghost, and the ghost shoots exactly like Evelyn Carter." Ryan Mitchell came at a dead run. He had not slept either. He had spent the hours since they landed sitting alone in the dark of an equipment bay, replaying the last radio call over and over, hearing her voice tell him to get his men home, hearing himself argue, hearing her count down and cut him off and go silent. He had built a permanent monument to that silence in the middle of his chest, and he expected to carry it for the rest of his life. And now a runner was pounding on the door telling him the colonel wanted him immediately, and Ryan came because that was what you did. But every step of the way, he was bracing for more bad news, more paperwork, more of the grinding, administrative machinery of death. He was not braced for what Brooks showed him. Master Chief, look at this feed and tell me what you see. Don't tell me what's possible. Don't tell me what we saw last night. Just tell me what you see right now with your own eyes on that screen. Ryan looked. And Ryan Mitchell, who had trained under Evelyn Carter, who had spent 11 years watching her work, who knew her style the way he knew his own reflection, felt every hair on his body stand up at once. Because he did not see a firefight. He saw her. He saw the way she flowed between positions, the way she used the terrain, the way she made the enemy chase a ghost, the exact rhythm of a woman he had watched do this very thing more times than he could count. It was not a resemblance. It was a signature. It was as unmistakable as her voice. That's Evie, he whispered. Say it again. That's her. Ryan's voice cracked wide open. Colonel, that's her. That's Evie. I'd know that anywhere. Nobody moves like that. Nobody in the world moves like that. That's Chief Carter. She's alive. Oh my God. She's alive. She's out there. For one long moment, nobody in the operations center moved or breathed. The impossible thing sat in the middle of the room, too big to touch. The woman they had buried on paper. The woman they had mourned, the woman a colonel had wept over, and a master chief had promised his whole life to, was on that screen, right now, moving, fighting, killing, surviving, refusing against every law of the physical world to be dead. And then Ryan Mitchell turned to Colonel Brooks with a look on his face that Brooks would remember for the rest of his days, and he said the words that would define everything that came after. We have to go get her, sir. We have to go back and get her right now. Brooks held his gaze. You know what Hire's going to say. She's declared. There's a KIA report with my signature on it that went up the chain hours ago. The bird that could reach her can't fly in the storm, and the moment it can, that valley is going to be crawling with every fighter in the province who wants to be the one who finally kills the American ghost. You know all that, Master Chief. You know exactly what you're asking me to do. I know I'm not leaving her out there. Ryan did not blink. She didn't leave us. She had one job on that ridge, and it was to save herself, and instead she stayed behind so 11 of us could walk out. She is out there right now, alone, hurt, fighting a whole army by herself, and she is doing it because she will not quit on us. So no, sir, I don't care what the report says. I don't care what Hire says. I am not going to sit in a warm room and watch her die twice. Something moved behind Colonel Brooks' eyes. He was a man who had spent 30 years learning to weigh things, to count costs, to make the hard, cold decisions that kept the most people alive. And every one of those 30 years told him that launching an unauthorized rescue into a storm against orders, toward a position swarming with enemy, to reach a soldier already declared killed in action, was madness. Every rule he had ever followed said no. But there was another thing in Nathan Brooks older than the rules that had been screaming since the moment he saw that single point of light moving through the dark. He thought about the KIA report with his name on it. He thought about how it had felt to say the word unrecovered. He thought about a lean, quiet woman from Montana who had corrected him in front of a room full of men, and been right, who had never once left anyone behind in her entire career, who was out on that mountain this very second, proving that she never would. Get me the team, Colonel Brooks said. The same 11, the ones she saved, and Master Chief. He stopped. His jaw worked. This is going to end my career. You understand that? The second I launch this, I am done. There's no version of this where I come out the other side still wearing this uniform. Ryan Mitchell looked his colonel dead in the eye. With respect, sir, she's worth your career. She's worth all our careers. She's worth just about everything I can think of. And Nathan Brooks, to his own surprise, found that he was smiling, a hard, grim smile, with no joy in it, but a great deal of something better than joy. Yeah, he said, she is. Out on the mountain, Evelyn Carter did not know that on a screen, far away, 2 men had just recognized her ghost. She did not know that a colonel was about to burn his 30-year career to the ground to reach her, or that 11 men she had saved were already pulling their gear back on, with grim, silent faces checking weapons, saying nothing. Every one of them ready to walk straight back into hell to bring her home. She did not know any of that. What she knew was the radio in her hand and the fear in the enemy's voices, and the storm still raging overhead. And she knew that she had a long way to go and one working arm to get there with, and she knew that the only chance she had was to keep the enemy so frightened, so scattered, so certain they were being hunted by something that could not die, that they would never organize the numbers it would take to finish her. She keyed the captured radio. She had listened long enough to learn their call signs, their voices, the cadence of their communications. And now, in the language she had spent years learning, in a voice pitched to match the fear already running through their net, Evelyn Carter began to speak to the enemy in their own tongue. She told them the ghost had been seen on the western slope. She told them men were dying on the western slope. She sent them running toward a place she was nowhere near, and she listened as the panic spread, as fighters called out to each other, as a whole enemy force began to bend and warp around a threat that existed only in the words she was feeding them. "That's it," she breathed, watching the storm, listening to the chaos she was conducting like an orchestra. "Come on, chase the ghost. Chase her right off the edge of the world." And then over the captured radio, cutting through the panic, came a voice that was different from the others. Calm, cold, commanding. A voice that did not sound afraid at all, a voice that spoke slowly and deliberately and silenced the frightened chatter with a few sharp words. Evelyn went still. She knew that kind of voice. She had heard it before in other mountains in other years. It was the voice of a man who was not going to be frightened by ghost stories, a man who was going to do the thing that terrified fighters never think to do, which was to stop and think and hunt the hunter. The voice gave an order, and Evelyn Carter, listening in the storm with the radio pressed to her ear, translated it in her head and felt the cold in her bones go colder still. The voice had ordered every man on the mountain to stop chasing shadows. It had ordered them to hold their positions, to stay in groups, to wait. And then it had said the thing that told Evelyn everything she needed to know about the man on the other end of that radio, the thing that turned her long night from a hunt into a duel. "Find the American," the voice said. "She is wounded. She is alone. And a wounded animal always runs the same direction. Toward home." Part 3 lưu ý Việt đủ 6.000 đến 6.500 từ, liên kết liền mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện pha hội thoại tạo thành một câu chuyện liền mạch khi ghép lại. Mỗi phần liền mạch với phần trước không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện ở đầu phần mới, liên kết các phần của câu chuyện một cách liền mạch, sử dụng câu chuyện tiếp giữa các phần, duy trì chủ đề. Tránh ngắt quãng đột ngột, không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng hoặc tiêu đề phụ, phong cách kể chuyện Mỹ Hoa Kỳ giống dâng dào cảm xúc chân thực và gần gũi, không mô tả cảnh, tập trung vào hành động, cảm xúc và tâm lý nhân vật. Viết phần tiếp đạt điểm 10 trên 10 và bổ sung tiết tấu câu chuyện nhanh, sửa lỗi AI kể theo ngôi thứ 3 tăng độ, kịch tính không viết lên mảnh, kết thúc phần không giới thiệu phần sau. Lưu ý trả lời trong một tin nhắn không nhảy sang mực document mới, 2 đến 3 phút cần có mini climax và đặt 10 đến 15 mini climax mỗi. Phần cứ 10 đến 12 phút có một twist lớn sâu sắc, đan xen mini cliffhanger mạnh hơn. Tăng tính tự nhiên cho phản ứng của các nhân vật, thêm nhịp điệu, kịch tính thực tế và gần gũi. Mỗi 8 đến 10 phút cần có móc giữ chân khán giả, thêm đánh dấu thời gian. Lưu ý không mô tả cảnh, không có phần gạch trong bài viết, viết văn bản phù hợp với thi TN và chỉ cần viết nội dung và viết đúng lệnh nhé. Show more part 3 toward home. The words hung in Evelyn's mind like a blade held to her throat because they were true. And because the man who spoke them knew they were true, and a man who understands his enemy is the most dangerous kind of enemy there is. She lowered the radio and lay still in the broken stone, and for the first time all night, she felt something close to real fear. Not the fear of dying, which she had made her peace with years ago on other mountains. This was the fear of being understood. Every frightened fighter on that net had been chasing a ghost, and a ghost can go anywhere, do anything, be anywhere. But this new voice had refused the ghost story. This voice had looked at the situation with cold, clear eyes and reduced it to a simple truth. A wounded soldier runs towards safety. Cut off the paths to safety, and you do not have to find her. You only have to wait for her to come to you. "All right," Evelyn whispered to the storm, and she made herself breathe slow, made herself think. "So you're smart, so you won't scare. Good, fine. Then we do this the hard way." She knew what he would do before he did it because she would have done the same thing. He would take the panic she had created and turn it into a plan. He would stop his men from chasing shadows and instead position them along every route down the mountain, every path a wounded person might take toward friendly lines and he would wait patient as a spider for her to walk into one of them. He was going to use her own instincts against her, the deep animal instinct that pulls every hurt creature toward the place it feels safe. So she would not go the way a wounded animal goes. She would go the way a hunter goes. But first she had to know where they were. Evelyn began to move, and every movement was a negotiation with a body that wanted to quit. Her broken arm, bound tight against her chest, throbbed with a deep, sick rhythm that matched her heartbeat. Her ribs turned every breath into a small war. The wound in her side had slowed its bleeding to a seep, but she could feel how much she had lost, could feel it in the gray edges that crept into her vision when she moved too fast and the way her hands had started to feel far away and not entirely her own. She was running on borrowed strength, and she knew it, and she rationed it like a woman crossing a desert rations water. She crawled to a vantage point along the ruined slope, moving in the pauses between lightning, freezing whenever the sky lit up, and she watched the mountain below her. And slowly, patiently, she began to read the enemy's positions the way she had read them all her life. There, a cluster of men holding a saddle between two ridges, exactly where a wounded person coming down would naturally funnel. There, a team dug in along the dry creek bed, the easiest walking route to the valley floor. And there, farther down, a larger group near the only trail that a person could actually navigate in the dark with a broken arm. He had done exactly what she predicted. He had corked every bottle. He was betting his whole hand on the certainty that she would take the path of least resistance, because wounded people always do. "You're right about the wounded animal," she murmured. "You're just wrong about which animal you're hunting." She keyed the radio again, and she went back to work with the only weapon that still cost her nothing but breath. She had learned their call signs. She had learned the calm commander's voice and the voices of the men who answered to him. And now, in their language, she began to poison their net. She imitated one of the outlying positions and reported movement on the eastern trail. She waited, listened, and heard the commander redirect a team to check it. Then she imitated a different position and reported movement on the western slope, contradicting herself, sowing confusion. She reported a wounded American seen limping toward the creek bed, then reported the same American seen a kilometer away, moving up, not down. She made herself into 3 people, 5 people, a whole phantom force of sightings, and she listened as the calm commander's men grew agitated as their reports began to contradict each other, as the beautiful, clean plan he had built started to fill up with noise. But the commander did not break. That was the thing that impressed her and frightened her in equal measure. She threw everything she had into his net, every trick she knew, and he simply refused to chase any of it. She heard him cut through the confusion again and again, calm and hard, telling his men to hold their positions, to report only what they saw with their own eyes, to trust nothing that came over the radio. He had figured out that she was inside their communications. He had figured it out fast, and instead of panicking, he had simply closed the door on her weapon, told his men to stop listening to the radio and start using their eyes, and gone back to waiting. "Smart," Evelyn breathed, and there was something almost like respect in it. "You're really, really smart. That's a problem." So she stopped talking. If he would not be fooled by the radio, then the radio was worthless, and a worthless tool was a liability. But before she set it down, she pressed it to her ear one more time and listened, because a man that disciplined that calm would eventually say something that told her who he was. And after a while, he did. In an unguarded moment, one of his men addressed him by name, and Evelyn caught it, and she filed it away in the cold, clear part of her mind, and she understood that she was not fighting a mob anymore. She was fighting one man, a good one, a patient one, and the whole night had narrowed down to a single question: who would outweight whom? Time. Everything was time now. She checked herself again honestly, the way her father had taught her to check a rifle, and the honest answer frightened her. She had maybe a few hours of real function left in her before the blood loss and the cold and the shock finished what the mountain had started. She could feel the clock running down in her own body, feel her thoughts starting to come a half-second slow, feel the cold reaching places it had not reached before. If she was going to get off this mountain, it had to be soon, and it had to be through a screen of men who were waiting for exactly that. She could not go around them, there were too many. She could not go through them by force. She had one arm and a stolen rifle and a fading body. So she would do the only thing left. She would make the mountain fight for her. The idea came to her the way the best ideas always came, all at once and complete, and she almost laughed at the audacity of it. The commander had positioned his men in the natural funnels in the saddles and creek beds and trails, the places where terrain channeled movement. But terrain that channels people also channels other things. It channels water. It channels rock. And a mountain that had just shed an entire ridgeline in a landslide was a mountain full of stone that was no longer sure it wanted to stay where it was. She knew this mountain now. She had studied it for an hour before the mission, the way she studied every mountain, and she had crawled across half of it in the dark since. She knew where the fresh scar of the collapse had left slopes hanging in unstable balance. She knew where a push in the right place, a well-placed shot into a keystone, a few rocks pried loose by one good arm might start something much larger. She had watched a mountain killer once tonight. Now she was going to teach it to work for her. She started with the team in the dry creek bed. They were dug in along the walls of the wash, using the natural cover exactly where a smart commander would put them, and exactly where they were most vulnerable to the one thing they were not watching for. Above them on the slope, the landslide had left raw and hanging, set a field of loose stone held in place by nothing more than habit, and a few larger boulders acting as anchors. Evelyn worked her way above it, moving in the dark between lightning flashes, and she found the anchor stones, and she studied the physics of it with the cold, patient eye of a woman who had spent her life understanding exactly how a small force applied in exactly the right place produces an enormous result. She could not move the big stones herself, but she did not need to move them. She only needed to move the small ones that held them and let gravity do the rest. It took her nearly half an hour of agonizing, one-armed labor prying and levering with a broken length of rifle stock she used as a bar, and the whole time she listened for the men below, ready to freeze at the first sign they had heard her. Twice she had to stop and press herself flat and wait out a sweep of their attention. Once a fighter climbed partway up the slope to relieve himself, coming close enough that she could hear him humming under his breath, and she lay in the dark with her knife in her one good hand and her heart hammering, and she waited, and he finished and went back down without ever knowing that death had been 3 feet away in the storm. She let him live. A missing man would raise an alarm. A killed man would raise an alarm. But rocks falling in a storm on a mountain that had already collapsed once tonight would raise nothing at all. When the last anchor stone finally shifted under her bar, she felt it go through her whole body, that first small movement that meant the balance had tipped. She scrambled back and down and away, and behind her the mountain remembered what it had learned earlier that night. One stone moved and struck 2 others, and those struck 4, and in the space of a few heartbeats, the entire raw slope above the creek bed came alive and poured down into the wash in a roaring river of stone. The men in the creek bed never had a chance to understand what was happening. One moment they were dug into perfect cover, waiting for a wounded woman to come to them. The next moment, the cover itself came down on top of them, tons of loose mountain filling the wash they had chosen for its safety, and the storm swallowed their voices whole. Evelyn did not stay to listen. She was already moving, already working her way toward the next position, and in the cold, clear center of her mind, she crossed one team off the board. One funnel opened. One door she could now walk through if she needed it, though she suspected she would not need that one because she had a better idea for how this night was going to end. On the enemy net, which she still monitored, even though she no longer spoke on it, she heard the commander react to the collapse. She heard him send a man to investigate, heard the horror in the report that came back, heard the commander go silent for a long moment. And when he spoke again, Evelyn heard something new in that calm, hard voice, something she had been working all night to put there. She heard the first thin crack of doubt, because a ghost that whispers on the radio can be ignored. But a ghost that brings a mountain down on your men in the middle of a storm is a different kind of problem entirely. And even the calmest, hardest, most disciplined commander in the world has to stop and wonder for just a moment whether the stories his frightened men have been telling might not be stories after all. Now you're wondering, Evelyn breathed, moving through the dark. Now even you. Good. Wonder a little more. 12 kilometers away, the wondering was over and the moving had begun. Master Chief Ryan Mitchell stood in the belly of a Chinook, with rotors already turning overhead, and he looked at the 11 men crammed into the aircraft with him, and he did not have to say anything, because there was nothing that needed saying. They were the same 11. Every man Evelyn Carter had saved on that ridge was here, Geared up, weapons-checked faces set in the particular grim calm of men who have decided to walk back into the worst night of their lives on purpose. Peterson had a fresh cast on his leg and had threatened 3 separate medics who tried to keep him grounded. Reyes had his arm in a sling and had simply refused to hear the word no. Not one of them had hesitated. Not one of them had asked whether it was authorized, whether it was smart, whether it was survivable. They had heard 3 words, "She's alive," and they had reached for their rifles. "Listen up!" Ryan's voice cut through the roar of the rotors. "You all know the storm's still bad. You know the flying's gonna be ugly. You know that valley is full of people who want us dead, and you know there's a KIA report already gone up the chain with her name on it, which means officially tonight we are flying into enemy territory to recover a woman the United States government has already declared dead. So if any one of you has a single doubt, this is the moment. Nobody thinks less of you. This is off the books, and it might be the last thing any of us ever does." Nobody moved toward the ramp. Nobody spoke. 11 men looked back at him with 11 versions of the same expression, and Peterson finally said what all of them were thinking. "With respect, Master Chief, you're wasting flight time. She didn't ask us if we had doubts on that ridge. She just stayed. So how about you sit down and let's go get her?" Ryan Mitchell looked at them. These men, he had bled beside these men who were alive because of one woman's choice, and something thick closed his throat, and he had to look away for a second before he could trust his own voice. "Yeah," he said. "Okay, let's go get her." In the operations center, Colonel Nathan Brooks watched the Chinook lift off into the storm on the drone feed, and he knew with the particular clarity that comes to a man who has just made an irreversible choice that his career was over. He had launched an unauthorized rescue mission off the books against standing orders into weather that everyone said could not be flown to recover a soldier he himself had officially declared killed in action. There was no board of inquiry in the world that would forgive it. There was no explanation that would save him. He had traded 30 years of service and everything that came with it on a single point of light, moving through the dark on a screen. And Nathan Brooks discovered that he did not care. He discovered, in fact, that it was the first thing he had done in a long time that felt entirely, completely right. "Lieutenant Hayes," he did not take his eyes off the feed. "You didn't authorize any of this. You weren't in the room. Whatever happens to me does not touch you. Is that understood?" "With respect, sir," Hayes stood a little straighter. "I've been in the room the whole time, and I'm not leaving it now." Brooks glanced at the young officer, and something passed between them, and he nodded once and did not argue. There would be time for arguing later if there was a later. Right now there was a Chinook fighting through a storm and 11 men riding it into hell, and somewhere on a black mountain, a woman refusing to die, and every one of them was worth more than a career, worth more than a rank, worth more than anything a man could put on paper. On the mountain, Evelyn Carter had one enemy position left that mattered, and it was the one the commander himself was running. She had felt it as the night wore on, the way you feel a current in a river. The other positions had grown ragged, uncertain, chewed up by fear and confusion and falling stone. But there was one point in the enemy's line that stayed calm, stayed disciplined, stayed exactly where it should be, and she knew that was where the commander was holding his people together by the sheer force of his own steadiness. As long as he stood, enemy stood. Break him, and the whole night broke with him. But she could not reach him by force. He was too well positioned, too well guarded, and she was too far gone. Her hands had started to shake now, a fine tremor she could not stop, and the gray at the edges of her vision had begun to crowd inward, and she understood with cold honesty that she was running out of the one thing she could not steal from a dead man's body. She was running out of herself. So she stopped trying to win the night, and she started trying to end it. She keyed the captured radio one last time. She had sworn off it because he had made it worthless. But she was going to use it for one final thing, and this time she was not going to lie. She was going to tell the truth, because sometimes the truth is the most devastating weapon of all. She spoke to him directly. She used his name, the name she had caught earlier in an unguarded moment, and she felt the whole enemy net go silent the instant she said it, because none of his men knew how the American ghost had learned their commander's name. And in his own language, slow and clear and calm, matching his calm with her own, Evelyn Carter spoke to the one man on the mountain who had not been afraid of her. She told him that she knew where he was. She told him she had brought down the creek bed and buried his men in it, that she had killed his scouts one by one in the storm, that she had walked out of the grave his mountain made for her and hunted his people through the dark, and that she was not a ghost, and she was not a spirit, and she was not a story. She was a soldier, and she was still coming. And then she told him the thing that was true, the thing that cost her nothing to admit and cost him everything to hear. She told him she was dying. She told him she had a few hours left at most, maybe less, that she was broken and bleeding and freezing and would very likely never see the sun come up. And she told him it did not matter because she had already won the only thing she had come to this mountain to win. 11 men were flying home tonight because of her. 11 men would see their children again. And nothing he did no plan, he made no position he held, could take that away from her, because it was already done, already finished, already carried out of this valley and beyond his reach. He could kill her, he probably would, but he had already lost the only game that had ever mattered to her, and they both knew it. The net stayed silent for a long time after she finished. The storm rolled on, and when the commander finally answered, his voice was different than it had been all night. It was still calm, it was still hard, but underneath it now was something Evelyn recognized, because she had heard it in her own voice on the ridge hours ago, when she said her last words to Colonel Brooks. It was the voice of a man who has come face to face with an enemy he cannot help but respect, an enemy who has beaten him not with strength, but with something he does not entirely understand. He asked her a question. Just one. He asked her why she had stayed on the ridge, why she had traded her own life for 11 men she could have run and saved herself instead of. He asked it not as a taunt, but as a real question, a soldier's question, one professional to another. And Evelyn Carter, dying in the storm on a mountain 9,000 miles from Montana, gave him the only answer she had ever had. Because a mission isn't over, she told him, until every teammate makes it home. And then, over the sound of the storm and the enemy net and her own failing heartbeat, Evelyn Carter heard the most beautiful sound in the entire world. Faint at first, buried under the thunder, so faint she thought her fading mind had invented it out of hope. But it grew. It resolved. It became unmistakable. The deep chopping thunder of rotors fighting through a storm that everyone said could not be flown, coming up the valley, coming for her, coming against orders and against sense, and against the whole weight of a report that had already written her ending. They had come back. Down in the operations center, Colonel Brooks surged toward the feed. On the mountain, Evelyn Carter turned her face up toward the sound, with tears cutting through the dirt and blood on her cheeks. And on the enemy net, the calm commander heard the same rotors she did and understood in the same instant what they meant, and his voice came across the radio one final time, no longer calm, no longer patient, sharp now with the fury of a man watching his prey slip away. He gave the order to spring the last trap. Every fighter he had left, every position, everything. Not to capture her anymore, not to recover a body, to make certain that the helicopter that had come so far to save the American ghost would become her tomb, and the tomb of every man aboard it, all of them together on the mountain in the storm. And Evelyn Carter, hearing that order, hearing the rescue that had come for her turn in an instant into a trap that could kill the very men she had died to save, dragged herself up out of the stone with the last of everything she had left, and reached for the stolen rifle and got ready to fight one more time. Part 4 lưu ý Việt đủ 6.000 đến 6.500 từ, liên kết liền mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện pha hơi thoại tạo thành một câu chuyện liền mạch khi ghép lại. Mỗi phần liền mạch với phần trước không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện ở đầu phần mới, liên kết các phần của câu chuyện một cách liền mạch, sử dụng câu chuyện tiếp giữa các phần, duy trì chủ đề, tránh ngắt quãng đột ngột, không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng hoặc tiêu đề phụ phong cách, kể chuyện Mỹ Hoa Kỳ giống văn giàu cảm xúc chân thực và gần gũi, không mô tả cảnh, tập trung vào hành động, cảm xúc và tâm lý nhân vật. Viết phần tiếp đạt điểm 10 trên 10 và bổ sung tiết tấu câu chuyện nhanh, sửa lời AI, kể theo ngôi thứ 3 tăng độ kịch tính, không viết lên màn kết thúc, phần không giới thiệu phần sau. Lưu ý trả lời trong một tin nhắn không nhảy sang mức document 10, 2 đến 3 phút cần có mini climax và đắc 10 đến 15 mini climax mỗi. Phần cứ 10 đến 12 phút có một twist lớn sâu sắc, đan xen mini cliffhanger mạnh hơn. Tăng tính tự nhiên cho phản ứng của các nhân vật, thêm nhịp điệu. Kịch tính thực tế và gần gũi. Mỗi 8 đến 10 phút cần có móc giữ chân khán giả, thêm đánh dấu thời gian. Lưu ý không mô tả cảnh, không có phần gạch trong bài viết, viết văn bản phù hợp với TTS và chỉ cần viết nội dung và viết đúng lệnh nha. Show more part 4. Get ready to fight one more time. That was the whole of it, the entire simple, terrible truth of the moment. The rescue that had come for her had just become a target, and every man aboard that helicopter was about to die on this mountain unless a dying woman with one working arm could do something about it, and Evelyn Carter had never in her life been able to do the sensible thing, which was to lie down and let the people she loved save themselves. She keyed the captured radio, and this time she was not talking to the enemy. She was gambling that somewhere in the belly of that inbound aircraft, someone was still monitoring the frequencies they had used on the mission, still scanning for any sign of her, and she poured the last of her strength into her voice and prayed it would carry. Any friendly station, this is Overwatch if you can hear me. Do not, I say again, do not fly straight up the valley. It's a trap. They're waiting for you. They've got the whole approach zeroed. Break off, come in from the South Ridge. The South Ridge is the only clean line. Do you copy the South Ridge? Static, storm, nothing. She said it again and her voice cracked on the words this time, and still nothing came back but the hiss of the storm, and Evelyn understood that she had no way to know if a single word of it had reached them. She might be shouting into the dark. The men she loved might be flying straight into the guns right now, trusting the valley, trusting the approach, having no idea that the calm commander had turned the entire mountain into a single enormous ambush with the landing zone at the center of it. So she did the only other thing she could do. If she could not warn the helicopter away from the trap, then she would tear the trap apart from the inside. She looked down at the enemy positions she had spent all night mapping, the ones the commander had arranged to spring the moment the aircraft committed, and she picked the one that mattered most, the heavy weapons. Somewhere in that line, the commander had a position with the firepower to actually bring down a Chinook, a crew-served weapon or a launcher, the thing that turned a rescue into a massacre. And Evelyn knew that if she did nothing else in the few minutes she had left on this earth, she was going to find that position and she was going to end it. She found it by its discipline, same as she had found the commander. In a line of men jumpy with fear and firing at shadows, there was one position that stayed silent, stayed still, stayed ready, and she knew that was the one the commander trusted with the killing blow. It sat on a shoulder of rock with a clean line up the valley exactly where the helicopter would have to pass, and it was well guarded, and it was too far for her to reach on foot before the aircraft arrived, and none of that mattered because she was not going to reach it on foot. She was going to reach it with the mountain. Above that position on the raw, unstable slope, the landslide had left behind sat one more field of hanging stone, and Evelyn had marked it hours ago, the way she marked everything, filing it away for a use she had not yet imagined. Now the use was clear. She could not move fast enough to reach the heavy weapons crew. But a rock slide moves faster than any man, and it does not tire and it does not miss, and all it needs is one person patient enough and desperate enough to start it. The rotors were louder now. She could feel them in her chest and the broken bones, the vibration of an aircraft fighting its way up the valley toward guns that were waiting to tear it out of the sky, and the sound put a clock on everything, a brutal shrinking clock, and Evelyn Carter began to climb. It was the hardest thing she had ever done, harder than digging out of her own grave, harder than holding the ridge. She climbed a mountain in a storm with one arm and 3 broken ribs, in a body that had lost too much blood to be climbing anything, and every foot of it was a small eternity of agony. And she did not stop, because stopping meant 11 men and a master chief died on this mountain tonight. And that was the one outcome her entire soul refused to permit. She thought about her father. She thought about his hands over hers in the wheat field. She thought about the shot coming to the one who was patient enough to wait for it, and she climbed, and the rotors grew louder, and somewhere below her the calm commander gave the order to make ready. She reached the top of the hanging slope as the Chinook came into view down the valley. For one frozen instant, she saw it all, laid out below her like a map of everything she loved and everything that wanted to kill it. The helicopter, low and heavy, fighting the wind, its shape black against the storm. The heavy weapons crew on their shoulder of rock, tracking it, waiting for the range to close, waiting for the shot that would end everything. And between them, on a slope of loose stone held by a few anchor rocks and a woman's failing strength, Evelyn Carter, out of time, out of blood, out of everything, but the one thing that had never once run out in her entire life. She jammed the broken rifle stock under the largest anchor stone, and she put her whole body into it, Her one good arm, her shoulder, her broken ribs, the last flickering reserve of a woman who had already died once tonight and refused to stay dead. And she screamed into the storm, and she pushed, and for a horrible moment, nothing moved, nothing at all, and she thought she had failed, thought she had climbed a mountain to die, watching her family die, and then the stone shifted. It shifted, and it slid, and it struck the stone below it, and the mountain woke up. The whole slope came alive at once, a roaring avalanche of stone pouring down toward the shoulder of rock, where the heavy weapons crew crouched over their weapon, and they heard it coming, and they looked up, and in the half second they had left, they understood that the mountain itself had turned against them. And then it took them. It took the weapon and the crew and the shoulder of rock, and all of it swept the whole position off the face of the mountain and buried it under 1,000 tons of stone, and the killing blow the commander had prepared for the helicopter simply ceased to exist. Down the valley, the Chinook flew on his crew, never knowing how close they had come, never knowing that a dying woman on a slope above them had just torn the mountain apart to keep them alive. But the commander was not finished, and neither was the enemy, and the loss of the heavy weapons only made them more desperate. The net erupted. Every fighter left on the mountain, every position, all of it converged on the one place the helicopter had to go, the small, flat saddle of ground that was the only possible landing zone in the whole valley. If they could not kill the aircraft in the air, they would kill everyone the moment they touched the ground. And Evelyn, spent empty, lying in the ruin of the slide she had just triggered, understood that the fight was not over. It had only moved, and she was too far away and too broken to reach it in time. The Chinook flared into the landing zone through a storm of enemy fire. Ryan Mitchell was first off the ramp, and he came off it into a nightmare. Tracers cutting through the rain from every direction, the whole rim of the saddle alive with muzzle flashes, and he understood in an instant that they had flown into exactly the trap Evelyn had tried to warn them about. He got his men down into what cover there was, and he started returning fire, and beside him, the 10 others did the same. And Colonel Brooks's voice was in his ear from the operations center, screaming the picture at him. Enemy on the north rim, enemy on the east, they've got you surrounded. And Ryan already knew Ryan could see it, and the terrible math of it landed on him all at once. They had come to save one person, and instead they had flown 12 people into a killing ground. "Where is she?" Ryan roared into the storm, firing, moving, dragging Peterson into better cover. "Overwatch, Overwatch, this is Mitchell. Where are you? Talk to me, where are you?" And through the captured radio, faint and failing, but there came the voice he had spent all night believing he would never hear again. "North Rim." Evelyn's voice was barely a whisper, but it was hers, unmistakably hers, and hearing it went through Ryan Mitchell like lightning. "Your heaviest fire's coming off the North Rim, Ryan. There's a machine gun up there. I can see the flashes. It's got your whole LZ pinned. You can't move till it's gone. And I'm not going to be able to reach it. I'm too far. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Don't you dare apologize to me." Ryan's voice broke apart completely. "Don't you dare. You just hold on, you hear me? You tell me where you are, and we are coming to get you. That is the whole reason we're here, Evie. We came back for you. We came all the way back for you." "I know you did." She was crying, he could hear it, and Ryan Mitchell had never once in 11 years heard Evelyn Carter cry. "I know you did. And now I need you to do one more thing for me. That machine gun on the North Rim, I can't reach it, but I can see it. And I've got a rifle, and I've got a line, and if I can put enough fire on it to make them keep their heads down just for a few seconds, you take your men, and you get off that landing zone, and you get to the high ground on the south side. Do you understand me? You move the second the gun goes quiet. You do not wait for me. You move." "Evie, no. We are not doing this again. We are not leaving you again. I will not do it. I will die on this mountain before I leave you here twice. Ryan." And her voice for one moment was steady, was calm, was the voice of the woman who had trained him, who had corrected a colonel in front of a room full of men who had held a ridge alone so 11 men could live. "Ryan, listen to me. I am not asking you to leave me. I already told you once tonight that's a different thing. I am asking you to get 11 men off this landing zone alive. And I promise you this time I am coming too. But you have to move when I give you the window. Now get ready." And then Evelyn Carter, who had climbed a mountain to save them, who had torn the earth apart, to save them, who had already given more than any human body was ever meant to give. raised a stolen rifle in a hand that would barely stop shaking, sighted across the valley through the rain and the dark at a machine gun position hundreds of meters away, and did the only thing she had ever really known how to do. She waited for the shot to come to her, and she took it. Her first round struck the north rim, and the machine gun's fire faltered. Her second struck closer, and the crew ducked, and for one precious second the gun went silent, and Ryan Mitchell's voice roared across the landing zone, "Move, move, move, everybody up, get to the south high ground, go, go, go." And 11 men rose out of the killing ground and ran, and Evelyn kept firing one round after another, keeping the machine gun crew pinned, buying them the seconds they needed, every shot costing her something she did not have left to spend. And she did not stop because they were moving, they were running, they were going to make it. And that was the only thing in the entire universe that mattered. They reached the high ground, all 11. And Ryan Mitchell, safe now, his men safe now, turned back toward the north rim in the valley, and the woman he could not see, and he keyed his radio and he said her name. There was no answer. Evie. His voice was very quiet now, quiet in a way that was worse than any scream. Evie, we made it. We're on the high ground. Every one of us. You did it. Now you talk to me. You talk to me right now. Where are you? Tell me where you are, and I am coming to get you, and I don't care if the whole mountain is between us. I am coming. Just talk to me. Please. Please talk to me. Static, storm, nothing. And then faint, so faint he almost missed it under the thunder, one word. His name. Ryan. I'm here. I'm here, Evie. I'm right here. Keep talking. Keep talking to me. Where are you? I can't. A long silence. A breath that sounded like it cost everything. I can't move anymore, Ryan. I used it all up. I don't have anything left. I'm on the slope above the north rim, but you can't come. The enemy's between us and there's no time. And I'm not worth 11 men. Don't you dare bring them back across for me. Don't you dare. You listen to me. Ryan Mitchell was already moving, already checking his rifle, already turning back toward the valley with a look on his face that made the men around him fall silent. You listen to me, Chief Carter. You told me tonight twice that saving 11 men and leaving you behind are two different things. Well, here's a third thing you're going to learn, because right now, every single one of those 11 men is standing up. Right now, every single one of them is checking his weapon, and every single one of them is about to walk back down into that valley with me to bring you home, because you taught all of us that a mission isn't over until every teammate makes it home. So you don't get to tell us you're not worth it. You made us who we are, and who we are does not leave you on that mountain. And behind him, 11 men stood up, Peterson on his broken leg, Reyes with his arm in a sling, Vasquez and all the rest, every man. Evelyn Carter had saved twice now, and not one of them said a word because no words were needed, because they had all heard her voice and they had all made the same decision in the same instant, the only decision she had ever taught them how to make. They checked their weapons. They looked at Ryan Mitchell, and they turned back toward the valley and the storm and the enemy and the woman lying broken on the slope above the north rim, and they went to get her, all of them together, into the teeth of everything. In the operations center, Colonel Brooks watched 12 friendly signatures move off the safe high ground and backbone into the killing valley, and he did not order them to stop. He could have. Every rule and regulation in 30 years of service told him to. Instead, Nathan Brooks stood in front of the screens with tears in his eyes and pride swelling in his chest until he thought it might break him open. And he said quietly to no one, to everyone, "Get her, boys. Go get our girl and bring her home." They fought their way across the valley in a moving wedge, and it was the fiercest fighting of the entire night, because the enemy understood now what was happening, understood that the Americans were coming for the Ghost, and threw everything left at stopping them. But the calm commander's men were shattered, their heavy weapons gone. Their positions collapsed, their nerve broken by a night of being hunted through a storm by a dead woman, and the 11 who came for Evelyn. Carter fought with something the enemy could not match, fought with the specific, unstoppable fury of men repaying a debt they could never fully repay, and they broke through. Ryan Mitchell reached her first. He came up the slope above the north rim through the fire and the rain, and he found her lying in the stone where she had fired her last rounds, the stolen rifle still in her hand, her face gray, her lips blue, so still That for one endless, terrible heartbeat, he was certain he had come too late. Certain the mountain had finally taken her after everything. And he dropped to his knees beside her and pulled her into his arms, and he said her name, and her eyes opened. They opened, and they found his face, and Evelyn Carter, dying on a mountain, 9,000 miles from Montana, looked up at the man she had trained, the man she had saved, the man who had refused against every order and every rule and every law of sense to leave her behind. And she smiled. "You came back," she whispered. "Of course I came back." Ryan was crying openly now, holding her, already signaling the medic, already shouting for the others. "You think I was going to let you have all the fun? You think I learned nothing from you in 11 years? You stayed for us, Evie, so we came for you. That's how it works. That's how you taught us it works." 11 men. Her voice was fading, but her eyes held his. "Ryan, tell me, all 11 from the ridge, they all made it home. Tell me it was worth it." And Ryan Mitchell held the woman who had bought every breath he would ever take, and he told her the truth, the only truth that had ever mattered to her, the truth she had spent 2 decades and one impossible night proving with her own body and blood. All 11 made it home, Evie. Every single one, because of you. And now you're going to make 12. You hear me? You're going to make 12. We are all going home together. Every last one of us. Just like you always said. The medic was on her now, working fast, and the others formed a wall of fire around them. And somewhere above the storm, the Chinook was already turning back, called in by a colonel who no longer cared about a single rule in the world. And Evelyn Carter closed her eyes in the arms of the man she had saved, not because she was giving up, but because for the first time in a very long night, she finally believed that everyone was going to make it home. The medic's hands moved fast and hard over her body, and Ryan held her head off the cold stone, and around them, the 11 made a ring of fire and refused to let a single enemy round reach the place where their sniper lay dying. But Evelyn was not gone yet, and even now, even at the very bottom of everything she had, some part of her mind would not stop working the problem, because working the problem was the whole of who she was. Ryan. Her eyes came open again, and there was something urgent in them, something that cut through the gray. "Ryan, listen to me. Don't let the medic move me yet. The commander. He's still out there. He's not broken like the rest of them. He'll hold his men together, and he'll hit you on the way out, right when you think you've won, right when the bird comes in. That's what I do. That's what he'll do. Evie, stop talking. Save your strength. Let the doc work. No, you listen." Her hand, the good one, closed on his wrist with a grip that startled him, more strength than a dying woman should have had. "You've got one window to get everybody on that helicopter, and he knows it too. He's going to wait for the LZ. He's going to wait for the moment you're all bunched up, loading wounded, and he's going to hit you then, because that's the moment you can't shoot back. You have to take him first. You have to find him before the bird comes in." Ryan looked at her, and he understood that even now, even flat on her back, with her life running out into the stone, Evelyn Carter was still running Overwatch, still watching their backs, still doing the one job she had done for 11 years and would apparently do until her very last breath. "Where is he?" Ryan said. "You've been listening to their net all night. You know his positions. Where is he?" "East, Reto." Her voice was failing now, coming in pieces. "He kept his best men there all night, never moved them, never committed them to any of the chases. That's his reserve. That's where he is. When the bird comes in, they'll come down off the east saddle and hit the LZ from the flank. You have to get somebody on that saddle first, Ryan. You have to close that door before the helicopter ever touches down, or you'll lose men loading up. You'll lose everything we spent tonight buying." Ryan keyed his radio. "Colonel Brooks, this is Mitchell, you copy?" "I copy, Master Chief." Brooks's voice came back instantly from the operations center, tight with strain. "I've got you on the feed. I've got heat signatures massing on the east saddle. You were right, they're not scattering like the others. That's an organized element, and it's moving toward your LZ. That's the commander's reserve, sir." Chief Carter called it. "We take the east saddle before we call the bird in, or we get chewed up loading wounded." There was a pause, and then Brooks's voice came back, and there was something in it that had not been there before, something that sounded almost like awe. "She's directing the fight. From the ground, bleeding out on that mountain, and she's still running your Overwatch." "Yes, sir," Ryan said, and his throat closed. "That's exactly what she's doing." "Then you listen to her, Master Chief. You listen to every word that woman says. Take the east saddle." Ryan turned to his men, and he split them without hesitation because there was no time for anything but speed. Vasquez and 4 others would hold the ring around Evelyn and the medic. Ryan and the rest would take the east saddle, would close the door the commander was counting on, would deny him the one card he had left to play. And as Ryan gathered himself to move, Evelyn's hand tightened on his wrist one last time. "The east saddle's got a false crest," she whispered. "There's a lip of rock about 2/3 of the way up, looks like the top, but it isn't, and there's dead ground behind it. That's where he'll have his machine gun. Don't come straight up the face, Ryan. He'll cut you down before you clear the lip. Come around the north shoulder low, and you'll come out behind the gun. He won't be expecting it. He's smart, but he's expecting you to do the obvious thing because you're rescuing a wounded soldier, and rescuers always take the fastest line. Don't take the fast line. Take the smart one." Ryan Mitchell looked at her for one long second. This woman who had taught him everything, who was teaching him, still in the last minutes of her life, on a mountain in the storm. "Copy that," he said softly. "North shoulder low, come out behind the gun. You've been in my ear for 11 years, Chief. I'm not about to stop listening now." And then he was moving and his men were moving with him, and Evelyn let her head fall back against the stone and let the medic work. And she listened because listening was all she had left, and she had made it enough. She listened to Ryan take his element around the north shoulder of the east saddle, exactly as she had told him, low and quiet, using the storm to cover their movement. And she listened to the sudden vicious eruption of gunfire as they came out behind the commander's machine gun position, exactly where the enemy was not looking. And she heard the machine gun that would have torn apart the landing zone go silent forever. She listened to Ryan's voice, tight and hard, calling the positions as they cleared them, and she heard the enemy's reserve, the commander's last disciplined element, come apart under an attack from a direction they had never anticipated. She had given them the door, and Ryan had walked through it, and the last trap of the night collapsed before it ever sprang. But the commander himself did not run. Evelyn heard it on the captured radio still clutched in her weakening hand. As his position fell apart around him, as his men were cut down or scattered, the calm voice she had dueled all night came across the net one final time, and it was not calling for retreat, and it was not calling for reinforcement. It was giving his surviving men permission to leave. It was telling them to break contact, to melt into the mountains to save themselves. It was a commander doing the last thing a good commander does, which is to spend himself so his people can live. And Evelyn Carter, listening to it, recognized it completely because it was exactly what she had done on the ridge hours ago, exactly the choice she had made, and she understood in that moment that the man she had fought all night was in the ways that mattered most on a battlefield not so different from herself. "Ryan," she keyed her radio. "The commander, he's covering his men's retreat. He's the one still fighting. Everybody else is running but him. I've got a position still active on the far side of the saddle." Ryan came back. "One shooter holding, keeping us pinned while the rest pull out. That's him. You want me to take him?" Evelyn was quiet for a long moment. The medic had gotten a line into her arm now, was pushing fluid, pushing something for the pain, and the edges of the world had softened. And through that softness, she thought about the man on the far side of the saddle, the one enemy all night who had not been afraid of her, the one who had understood her, the one who had asked her why she stayed on the ridge and had listened to her answer like it meant something. "He's covering a retreat," she said finally. "Same as I did. Same exact thing. Ryan, don't chase him. Let his men go and let him go with them if he'll go. We got what we came for. We're all still alive. Don't spend one more life tonight, not ours and not his, not you just don't have to. That's not what tonight was about." There was a silence on the radio, and then Ryan's voice came back, quiet, understanding. "Copy, Chief. We hold. We let them break contact." And on the far side of the saddle, the calm commander, perhaps hearing the American fire slacken, perhaps understanding that he was being allowed to leave, held his position one moment longer, and then went silent and faded into the mountains with the last of his men, and the battle that had raged across the mountain all through the storm, finally at long last went quiet. Ryan came back to her at a dead run. "East saddle's clear," he said, dropping down beside her. "They're gone, Evie, all of them. The reserve's broken. The commander pulled out the LZ's cold. We did it. We closed every door. There's nothing left between us and that helicopter but open ground. He looked at the medic. How is she? Tell me straight. The medic's face was grim. She's lost a lot of blood, Master Chief. Too much. The arm's bad, the ribs are bad. She's hypothermic. She's in shock. I've got fluid in her, and I've got her stabilized as much as I can out here. But she needs a surgical table in the next hour or we lose her. This is a bird or she dies situation. There's no in between. Then we get the bird. Ryan was already on the radio. Colonel Brooks' LZ is cold. I say again, the LZ is cold. We need that Chinook inbound right now. We've got a critical casualty. We are on the clock, sir. Get us that bird. Bird's already turning, Master Chief. Brooks's voice was thick. Been turning since you cleared the saddle. 2 minutes out. You get her ready to fly. And in the 2 minutes it took the Chinook to come back up the valley, Ryan Mitchell knelt in the storm and held Evelyn Carter's hand, and he talked to her because the medic had told him quietly to keep her talking, keep her conscious, keep her here. And Ryan Mitchell would have talked until the sun came up if that was what it took. You remember the first day I met you, he said. You remember that I was some cocky kid straight out of the pipeline, thought I knew everything, and they told me I was going to be trained by the best sniper in the whole outfit. And I walk in and it's you, this quiet lady from Montana who barely says 10 words. And I thought, no way, this is who they're talking about. And you took me out to the range and you didn't say a thing. You just watched me shoot for an hour. And then you walked over and you said the only thing you said to me all day. You remember what you said. Evelyn's lips moved, a ghost of a smile. I said you were chasing it. You said I was chasing it. Ryan laughed and the laugh came out broken. You said, kid, you're chasing the shot. You got to let it come to you. And I thought that was the dumbest thing I ever heard. And it took me about 6 months to understand it was the truest thing anybody ever told me. About shooting, about everything. Let it come to you. Be patient. Do the work and wait, and the thing you need will come. His voice cracked wide open. So that's what I need you to do right now, Evie. You do the thing you taught me. You be patient. You wait. That bird is coming to you. It's coming right now. So you just hold on and let it come. Don't you chase it. Don't you go anywhere. Just wait for it. Please just wait for it. Ryan. Her eyes found his and they were clear for one moment, perfectly clear. I need you to know something. In case I don't. Don't do that. In case. Her hand tightened. 11 men on that ridge, and I would do it again. Every part of it. The mountain coming down, the digging out, all of it, every second of tonight, I would do it all again because you're here and you're breathing and every one of you is going home. That's not a sad thing, Ryan. Do you understand me? That's the opposite of a sad thing. Don't you let anybody tell my story like it's a sad thing. I got exactly what I came for every single time. And then the Chinook came down out of the storm. It came down into the cold LZ with its ramp already dropping, and the 11 men Evelyn Carter had saved twice lifted her together. All of them, every hand that could reach her reaching, and they carried her up the ramp and into the belly of the aircraft with a gentleness that 11 hard men should not have been capable of. And they laid her down, and the medic went back to work, and the ramp came up, and the Chinook clawed its way back up into the sky and turned for home. Ryan Mitchell sat on the floor of the shaking aircraft with Evelyn's head in his lap and her cold hand in both of his, and he watched the mountains fall away behind them. The same mountains that had buried her, the same storm that had hidden her, the same valley that had tried so hard all night to make itself her grave. And he bent down close to her ear so she could hear him over the roar of the rotors, and he said the words one more time, the words she had said to him, the words she had made the whole of her life. A mission isn't over, he said, until every teammate makes it home. And you're coming home, Evie. You're finally coming home. All 12 of us, together, just like you always said. Her hand moved in his, a small pressure, an answer. And far below the storm that had raged over the mountain all through that endless night, finally at long last began to break, and somewhere behind the clouds, for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, there was the faintest gray promise of a coming dawn. The faintest gray promise of dawn was still just a promise when the Chinook touched down at the forward surgical base, and then everything became noise and speed and hands, and Ryan Mitchell was shoved aside by people whose job it was to do the one thing he could not, which was to keep Evelyn Carter alive. He stood on the tarmac in the last of the storm, and he watched them carry her away from him at a run, a blur of green and blood, and shouted numbers, and he did not move for a long time after the doors swallowed her, because moving meant this was real, meant the fight was out of his hands, now meant that after everything, after the ridge and the mountain and the storm, and the whole impossible night, whether Evelyn Carter lived or died was going to be decided by strangers in a room he could not enter. He had never in his life felt so useless. He had carried her off that mountain. He could not carry her through this. Master Chief? A hand on his shoulder. Vasquez. His face was gray with exhaustion and streaked with something that was not rain. Come on, come inside. Standing out here in the cold isn't going to help her. I can't leave Vasquez. Nobody's asking you to leave. We're all staying, every one of us. Peterson's already in there refusing to let them treat his leg till he gets word on her. Reyes won't sit down. Nobody's going anywhere, Master Chief. We don't have to freeze while we wait. Vasquez's voice broke a little. She'd want us inside. You know she would. She'd be furious we were standing out here catching cold on her account. And that of all things was what finally moved him, because it was true, because he could hear her saying it, could hear that dry Montana voice telling them to quit standing around in the rain like a bunch of idiots, and Ryan Mitchell let himself be led inside to wait. They waited a long time. The 11 men who had walked back into hell for her sat together in a cold corridor, and they waited, and none of them slept, and none of them left, and every time a door opened, they all looked up at once, with the same desperate question on their faces, and every time it was not the answer they were waiting for. Peterson finally let a medic look at his leg, only because Reyes told him flat out that Evelyn would kick his backside herself if she woke up, and found he'd made it worse being stubborn. They talked in low voices, in the way men talk when they are trying not to think about the thing they cannot stop thinking about. They told stories about her, the time she'd outshot an entire visiting team from another country and never once mentioned it afterward. The time she'd stayed up all night helping a young operator write a letter to a wife he was afraid he was losing. The 100 small things she had done over the years that none of them had ever thanked her for, because she was the kind of person who made you feel like thanking her would somehow be an insult, like she'd only done what anyone would do, when the truth was that almost no one would have done any of it. Colonel Nathan Brooks arrived 4 hours into the wait. He had flown in the moment he could, and he came down the corridor still in the same uniform he had worn all through that endless night in the operations center, and he looked, the men thought, like he had aged 10 years since they'd last seen him. He stopped in front of them, and 11 men got to their feet out of pure reflex, and Brooks waved them back down. Sit down, all of you. You've earned the right to sit in my presence for the rest of your lives, as far as I'm concerned. He looked around at them, at their exhausted, bloodied faces, and something moved in his own. Any word? She's still in surgery, sir, Ryan said. Going on 4 hours now. Nobody's told us anything except that she's still fighting. Of course she's still fighting. Brooks lowered himself into a chair among them, this colonel sitting down in a row of enlisted operators like he was one of them, because tonight, in the only way that mattered, he was. That woman has never quit anything in her entire life. She's not going to start on a surgical table. They sat together, the colonel and the 11, and they waited. And Ryan, sitting beside the man who had burned his own career to the ground to send that helicopter, finally asked the question that had been building in him all night. Sir, can I ask you something? You knew what launching that mission was going to cost you. You said it yourself before we lifted off. You said it was going to end your career. And you did it anyway. Why, Brooks was quiet for a moment. Then he said, because I signed the paper, Master Chief. Sir, the KIA report, I signed it. With my own hand, I wrote her name, and I wrote that word unrecovered, and I sent it up the chain, and for about 6 hours I believed it, and it was the worst 6 hours of my life. And then you showed me that feed, and I saw one shooter working a whole squad in a style I'd know anywhere, and I understood that I had done the one thing I swore to every single person under my command that I would never do. His voice hardened. I gave up on one of my people. I quit on her. On paper in ink with my signature, I quit on Evelyn Carter. And once I understood that there was no cost too high to fix it, there was no career worth keeping if keeping it meant living the rest of my life as the man who quit on her while she was still out there fighting. He looked at Ryan. You want to know why I launched that mission, Master Chief? I launched it because she never would have quit on me. Not in 1,000 years. And I couldn't stand to be a smaller man than she was. Nobody said anything for a while after that. And then in the seventh hour, the door opened, and this time it was different because the surgeon who came out was pulling down his mask, and he was looking for someone, and his eyes were tired, but they were not the eyes of a man who had lost a patient. Are you the ones who came in with the Carter woman? 11 men and a colonel were on their feet before he finished the sentence. She's alive. The surgeon said it fast, mercifully, before the question could kill anyone. She's alive. I want to be honest with you, she should not be. I have been doing this a long time, and I have never seen a body come in as far gone as hers was and hold on. She lost more blood than a person can lose. She had injuries that should have stopped her hours before you ever got her on that helicopter. Every law of medicine I know says she should have died on that mountain, and she didn't. And I cannot fully explain to you why. But she's alive. She's stable. She has a very long road ahead of her, more surgeries, months of recovery, and I won't pretend it'll be easy, but she is going to live. The sound that came out of those 11 men was not a cheer. It was something rawer than a cheer, something that came up from a deeper place, the sound of people who have been holding their breath for 7 hours, finally being allowed to let it go. Peterson sat down hard because his legs stopped working. Reyes turned away and put his face against the wall. Vasquez laughed, and it came out as a sob. And Ryan Mitchell stood absolutely still in the center of all of it, with tears pouring down his face. And he said very quietly to no one, to her, "You let it come to you. You waited. You didn't chase it. You let it come." Colonel Brooks put his hand over his own eyes and stood like that for a long moment. And when he took it away, he was a man who had gotten back something he thought he had lost forever. "Can we see her?" Ryan asked. "One at a time when she wakes up and not before. She needs rest more than she needs visitors." The surgeon almost smiled. "Though I'll tell you in there, when we were losing her, when her pressure bottomed out, and I thought that was it, she said something. She wasn't really conscious. It was just sometimes the body talks when the mind's gone, but she said the same thing 3 times. You want to know what it was?" "Yes," Ryan said. "Yes, I do." She said all 11 over and over. All 11 made it home. The surgeon shook his head slowly. "I don't know what it means. But whatever it was, I think it might be the thing that kept her heart beating when nothing else could. I've seen it before, rarely. A person holds on for a reason. She had one. Strongest one I've ever seen." Ryan Mitchell could not answer him. He could not speak at all. He simply turned to the 10 men around him and to the colonel. And no words were needed, because every single one of them understood exactly what it meant. Understood that even at the very edge of death, unconscious with her heart failing, the only thing Evelyn Carter's body had cared about, the only thing strong enough to hold her to the earth, was the knowledge that the men she loved had made it home. She woke 2 days later. Ryan was the one sitting with her when it happened, because they had worked out a rotation among themselves, an unspoken agreement that she would never once open her eyes to an empty room, and it was his shift, and he was half asleep in a hard chair when he heard the smallest sound and looked up and found her watching him. Her eyes were open, they were clear, and they were unmistakably annoyed. "You look terrible," Evelyn rasped. Ryan Mitchell laughed and cried at the same time, which is a difficult thing to do, and leaned forward and took her good hand in both of his. "Yeah, well, you should see the other guy, which is you. You look worse." "How long?" 2 days. You've been out 2 days. He squeezed her hand. "You're at the surgical base. You made it at Evie. You're going to be okay. It's going to take a while, but the doc says you're going to be okay." She was quiet, absorbing that, and he watched her do the thing she always did, the careful inventory, the reading of her own situation one piece at a time. And then she asked the only question that had ever mattered to her, the question that had held her heart to the earth when nothing else could. The team. All 11 made it home. Ryan said it clearly so there could be no mistaking it. Every single one. From the ridge, from the rescue, all of it. Not one man lost Evie, not one because of you. And now there's 12 of us because you made it too. 12 all the way home, just like you always said. And Evelyn Carter closed her eyes and 2 tears ran down the sides of her face into the pillow. And Ryan understood that they were not tears of pain. They were the tears of a woman who had spent an entire night, an entire career, an entire life carrying the weight of other people's survival on her own back. finally being allowed to set that weight down for a moment and simply be glad. Good, she whispered. That's good. That's all I wanted. The weeks that followed were hard, and Evelyn faced them the way she faced everything, one piece at a time. No rushing, no chasing. There were more surgeries. There was pain that did not respond to being ignored, which was a new and unwelcome experience for a woman who had spent her whole life treating pain as mere information. There was the slow, humbling work of a body relearning things it had always done without thinking. And through all of it, she was never once alone, because the men she had saved would not permit it, because they had appointed themselves a kind of permanent honor guard, and they rotated through her recovery the way they had rotated through her surgery waiting room, so that there was always someone there, always a familiar face, always one of the family. She had bled for sitting in the corner, pretending to read while they kept watch over the woman who had kept watch over all of them for so long. But the story was not finished, because there was still the matter of why. Colonel Brooks had not forgotten. Even as he waited for the machinery of his own career's destruction to grind into motion, even as he sat by Evelyn's bedside and celebrated her survival, the cold, hard part of his mind that had kept people alive for 30 years had never once let go of the thing that had been wrong from the very beginning. The intelligence. 3 sleepy centuries, the reports had said. A soft target, and instead his people had walked into a fortified position full of fighters who were waiting for them, who knew they were coming, who had prepared a kill box with the patience of men given time to prepare it. That was not bad luck. That was not the fog of war. And Nathan Brooks intended to find out exactly what it was, because 11 men had nearly died and 1 woman had nearly died 4 separate times, and somebody somewhere was responsible for that. And Brooks was not a man who let responsibility go unanswered. The investigation took weeks, and it was Evelyn's survival that cracked it open. Because Evelyn had been on that mountain. Evelyn had listened to the enemy's net all night. Evelyn had heard things, understood things, remembered things that no one else could have, because no one else had been down in the dark with a captured radio pressed to their ear, translating the enemy's own words. And when the investigators finally came to interview her, expecting a formality, expecting a wounded soldier with a fragmented memory of a chaotic night, they instead found a witness with a mind like a steel trap in a story that did not match the official version of events at all. They were waiting for us, Evelyn told them, propped up in her hospital bed, her voice steady and cold. That's the part nobody wants to say out loud, so I'll say it. That position wasn't a soft target that happened to have more men than we expected. That position was prepared. They had interlocking fields of fire set up in advance. They had fighters pre-positioned in every window and on every roof. They knew our approach route because they had it zeroed before we ever stepped off. You do not set up a kill box like that on an hour's notice. That took time. That took planning. And you cannot plan for an assault you don't know is coming. She looked at the investigators dead in the eye. Somebody told them we were coming. Somebody gave them the mission, the time, the route, the whole thing. That's the only way that night makes sense. We didn't walk into an ambush. We walked into an appointment. It was the thread that unraveled everything. Because once the investigators stopped assuming the intelligence had simply been wrong and started assuming it had been deliberately false, the whole picture reorganized itself into something far darker. They traced the intelligence back through the chain, and the deeper they went, the worse it got. The information that had painted that fortress as a soft target had not come from a mistake. It had been manufactured. Someone with access to a classified network, someone trusted someone inside, had fed the operation a lie designed to walk an entire SEAL team into a prepared killing ground. It had not been an intelligence failure at all. It had been a betrayal. The mission had been designed from the very beginning to eliminate that team before they ever reached the target. And the reason it had failed, the only reason those 11 men were alive to tell the story, was that the person who planned the betrayal had not accounted for one variable. They had not accounted for Evelyn Carter. They had not imagined that when the trap closed, one sniper would stay behind on a collapsing ridge to buy her team an escape. They had not imagined she would survive the mountain coming down on her. They had not imagined she would climb out of her own grave and hunt their allies through a storm and remember every word she heard on their radio. The betrayer had built a perfect trap, and Evelyn Carter had walked into it, and instead of dying quietly as she was supposed to, she had lived, and her survival had become the single piece of evidence that could not be explained away, the loose thread that pulled the entire conspiracy apart. They found the person responsible. Brooks was in the room when they made the arrest, and he watched a man in a pressed civilian suit, a man who had sat in secure briefings and spoken of protecting the very people he had sold, be led away in handcuffs, and Nathan Brooks felt no satisfaction in it, only a cold, grim closure. Because 11 men had nearly died and one woman had nearly died for this man's treason, and no arrest could give back the nights they had all lost, or the fear, or the grief, or the moment a colonel had signed a name and a terrible word onto a piece of paper. But it was justice of a kind. It was the truth dragged into the light, and it had been dragged there by a woman that the betrayer himself had condemned to die, which was a justice so perfect that even Brooks, a man not given to poetry, could not help but see the shape of it. And here was the twist that changed everything about how the world would remember that night. Because Evelyn Carter's decision to stay behind on the ridge, that single choice that everyone had called a sacrifice, that everyone had assumed was simply the noble act of a soldier trading her life for her team, turned out to be the thing that saved far more than 11 men. It saved the truth. If she had run, if she had saved herself, as any reasonable person would have, she would never have been on that mountain. To hear the enemy's net, never have survived. To testify, never have become the evidence that exposed the betrayal. The traitor would have succeeded completely. The team would have been written off as a tragic intelligence failure, the truth buried under half a mountain, along with the woman who could have told it. Evelyn Carter's sacrifice had not just saved 11 men. It had saved every future team that betrayer would have sold. She had stayed behind to hold a mountain, and in doing so without ever knowing it, she had held the line for people she would never meet. When they told her, she was quiet for a long time. So it was worth even more than I thought, she finally said. The staying. It was worth more than any of us can measure, Chief, Brooks told her. You have no idea. The people you saved by surviving, the ones who will never know your name, the ones who will come home to their families in the years ahead because that man is behind bars instead of selling their missions. You saved all of them. On a ridge in a storm, with a rifle and a broken arm, you saved all of them. Evelyn considered this, and then she said the thing that told Brooks more than anything else in the entire ordeal exactly who she was. I didn't stay for all that. I want to be clear. I didn't know about any of it, the traitor, the network, none of it. I stayed for the 11 men in the gully. That's all. That's the only reason. Everything else that came out of it, that's just what happens when you do the right thing for the right reason. Good things come out of it that you never planned. But you don't do it for those things. You do it for the 11 men in the gully. You always do it for the 11 men in the gully. She looked at him. Don't let anybody turn me into something I'm not, Colonel. I'm not a hero who saw the whole board. I'm just a woman who wouldn't leave her people. That's the whole story. That's all it ever was. Months passed. The story, of course, could not be contained, not entirely. Too many people knew the outline of it, the woman declared dead, who emerged from the storm, the sniper who held a mountain alone, the betrayal she exposed by refusing to die. It moved through naval special warfare the way the best stories move, quietly told operator to operator, in the low reverent voices men use for the things that matter most. And it grew the way stories grow until Evelyn Carter had become something close to legend in the community she had served for 2 decades. There were people who wanted to make her famous. There were journalists who wanted the story medals that were offered, ceremonies planned in her honor. She refused all of it. She refused the interviews politely and completely, every single one. She refused the medals, which caused no small amount of consternation among people who did not understand a person who did not want them. When they tried to hold a ceremony, she declined to attend her own recognition, and when pressed on why, she gave the same answer she gave to everything, the answer that was the whole of her. I didn't do it for a medal. Pinning one on me now would make it look like I did, and I didn't. Give the recognition to the 11 who walked back into that valley for me. They didn't have to, they chose to. That's worth a medal. Me staying behind, that wasn't a choice. That was just who I am. You don't give a person a medal for being who they are. And so quietly, without fanfare, without interviews or ceremonies, or a single medal he would agree to wear, Chief Warrant Officer Evelyn Carter recovered from her wounds and endured the long, humbling months of rehabilitation. And one ordinary morning, without any announcement at all, she returned to active service. Colonel Brooks, it turned out, did not lose his career. He had been prepared to. He had launched an unauthorized mission against orders and every rule in 30 years of service, and he had made his peace with the consequences. But the truth of that night changed everything. Once the betrayal was exposed, once it became clear that the mission had been a deliberate trap and that Brooks's unauthorized rescue had been the thing that saved 11 men and exposed a traitor, the machinery that should have ended him instead quietly turned the other way. There were people who understood what he had done and why people who understood that a commander who burns his own career rather than quit on his people is exactly the kind of commander the service cannot afford to lose. He stayed, and he never forgot for a single day of the rest of his career the lesson a woman from Montana had taught him on the worst night of his life. You do not quit on your people. Not on paper, not in ink, not ever. Whatever it costs. The years went on, and one afternoon long after, on a quiet range under a wide sky that was not so different from the wide skies of the Montana she had grown up under, a young sniper worked up the nerve to ask Evelyn Carter the question that everyone eventually wanted to ask, the question about the mountain and the storm and the impossible survival. "Chief," the young woman said, "can I ask you something? That night, when everyone thought you were dead, buried under the whole mountain, no way out, hurt, as bad as you were all alone, how did you survive that? How does anybody survive that? What was going through your head?" Evelyn Carter watched her young student for a moment, and something passed across her weathered face, some memory of cold and dark and a heart that would not stop beating. And then she smiled a small, quiet smile, the smile of a woman who had made her peace with a great many things a long time ago. "You want to know the truth," she said. "It wasn't strength. Everybody thinks it was strength, that I was just tougher than the mountain, tougher than the cold, tougher than dying. That's not it. I wasn't stronger than any of it. There were plenty of moments down in that dark where I had nothing left, where every part of me wanted to just stop and let it be over." She looked out across the range, out toward the horizon. "What kept me going wasn't strength. It was that I had a reason. 11 men in a gully, 11 men going home. And as long as I had that reason, my body it kept finding one more piece of itself to give. Because the reason was bigger than the pain. The reason was bigger than the fear. The reason was even bigger than dying." She turned back to the young sniper. "That's the whole secret. That's the only thing I know that's worth teaching. Find something to fight for that's bigger than yourself, something outside your own skin, and you will be amazed what your body will do to keep you in the fight. I didn't survive that mountain because I was strong. I survived it because I had somewhere to be and 11 people who needed me to get there." The young sniper was quiet, absorbing that, and then she asked, "But how did you know? In the middle of all that, buried alive, everyone thinking you were dead, how did you know you'd make it? How did you know it wasn't over?" And Evelyn Carter gave the answer that would follow her for the rest of her life, the answer that men and women in that community would repeat for years to come in low, reverent voices whenever they told the story of the sniper who was declared dead and rose from the storm. "Because a mission isn't over," she said, "until every teammate makes it home. And I still had teammates who weren't home yet, including me." She picked up her rifle and settled her cheek against the stock, the way her father had taught her, the way she had done 10,000 times. And she breathed out slow, and she did not chase it, and she let it come. "So it wasn't over. It's that simple. It wasn't over, so I didn't stop. You don't stop until everyone's home. Not 11 out of 12, not almost everyone, everyone. That's the whole job. That's the only job there ever was." She had proved it on a mountain that tried to bury her, in a storm that tried to hide her against an enemy that tried to break her, and a betrayer who tried to erase her. She had been shot and buried and declared dead and mourned and written off in ink by the very people who loved her most. And she had refused every bit of it. She had climbed out of her own grave and hunted her hunters and torn a mountain apart with one good arm and held the line for 11 men and for a truth that would save countless more. And she had come home, all the way home, because that was the only ending she would ever accept. Evelyn Carter did not survive that night because the world let her. She survived it because she decided in the cold and the dark, at the very bottom of everything, that her people were going home and that she was going with them. And no mountain, no storm, no enemy, and no traitor on this earth was strong enough to write her ending for her. She wrote it herself. She always had. And it ended as she had sworn it would, with every single one of them home.